Welcome to They Mostly Pot Out at Night. Mostly, I am Salem, joined by my co-host, Graveyard.
Hello.
This is episode 6 of our weekly All Things Horror podcast. Our topic for this week is what makes horror. Also, we're going to discuss some various remakes and reboots and legacies and revivals. We will start off with a broad question, but an interesting one. When does sci-fi become horror, or when does horror become sci-fi? We're going to mention some examples and just kind of go from there. You want to kick it off, or you want me to kick it off?
No, I'll go ahead and kick it off. First example, obviously, sci-fi becoming horror, Event Horizon, right? It takes place on a spaceship that they essentially travel through hell, and becomes really a slasher film after that. I would say that. I can't think of his name, the actor, the main guy.
Which one? Larry Fishburne or Sam Neill?
Sam Neill, yes. That, he essentially comes back, realistically, almost as a Cenobite, because didn't they kind of confirm that the idea is they went through the Cenobite hell when they traveled through that wormhole?
Yes. Yeah. They've also confirmed, the writer also confirmed that he got the idea from Warhammer 40K.
Okay.
If you're familiar with that, they have like spaceships that, they can kind of warp from one place to another place. But when they do, they have to go through this like alternate dimension, which is essentially hell.
Right.
So their ships in that future have protections against them, so they don't get corrupted by hell. But sometimes if those, protections fail, they can end up in hell. Essentially, Event Horizon is like the first time that humanity tries to use the warp, and without protection, that's what happens. It's like essentially hell takes over.
Right. Do we consider the wormhole essentially to be 4D travel at that point in time? That because it's outside time, essentially, because it just kind of goes from, fold the piece of paper, you stick the pin through it, right? You point A, point B, you fold it, and you go from there. And essentially, that's how I think it should be traveling through time, which would be an alternate dimension, which in this case would be hell.
Mm-hmm.
It starts off as a pretty good sci-fi, and then it really takes a violent turn after they go through the wormhole, right?
Right. Yeah. Basically, this starts off as like what's space salvage? They have to try to figure out, this ship has come back. We need to get on it. We need to figure out what happened. Where the crew is. Blah blah blah.
Right.
And then they get on it, and then of course, people start seeing things. Having visions, and of course, it descends into the horror from there. But yes, it definitely starts off as a sci-fi story.
It's almost in the lines with, I think, the Alien franchise as well. That it's sci-fi for the most part, right? Also salvage. There's a lot of blue collar work in space that a lot of these things take place on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really interesting that this, with Event Horizon, I recall growing up, people going, "Oh, it's the scariest movie they've ever seen." Did you have that experience too? Because, like I said, I was, getting into horror, and people I'm trying to find the scariest movie, right? Event Horizon was always top of that list for a lot of people I talked to.
Yeah, but I didn't really get that it was the scariest thing ever. It was just, it was very, very cool. Most of the people that I knew really liked it. I liked it a lot just because it had a lot of the same imagery as like Hellraiser did.
Right.
And I was a big Hellraiser fan at the time, and most of my friends were. So yeah, to us, it was cool. It was kind of like a sci-fi, version of a, like a neo Hellraiser almost. But yeah, like all those, visions of hell, you only get a couple frames of it, but it's enough to put that image in your brain.
Right. The ship and everything like that. Like I said, it feels like Alien meets Hellraiser, with Hellraiser being the xenomorphs at this point.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, Alien, sci-fi, gets into horror, briefly goes into action a bit for a couple of movies too. But I'm just thinking, when the sci-fi become horror, do we talked about this before, Jurassic Park. That's science fiction, pseudo science fiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes horror-ish with elements of people getting picked off one by one, running for their lives, and confined space, no power, no help coming to the rescue. it's in the same atmosphere of horror, but it's science fiction as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, the three elements that would make up like Jurassic Park would be, sci-fi, of course, because otherwise, how do you get the dinosaurs? But also adventure, right? I mean, it's it's adventure, like people discovering this new world and trying to survive and try to get out of that world, right? But then also, yeah, you have a little bit of horror elements, but it's like I would say of the three, horror would be the least, but it's definitely there. I mean, like when the T-Rex is there, they
Right.
can hear it going around, like, oh, the goat disappears, what's going on, and then it attacks, and you have no defense against it. You can't do anything against it. So even though you can see it, what it is, it's still horror because there's nothing you can do.
Right. It's a stalker at that point in time. Right. I feel like it's just, the big bad, which, funnily enough, T-Rex was the big bad in the number 2, on number 3 was the whateversaurus, right? The bigger one with the horns. And then I think, Jurassic World brings back the T-Rex is the hero, the same T-Rex.
I would say arguably the first Jurassic Park has the T-Rex as the hero. Because the T-Rex takes out that last raptor as it's jumping. It's going to kill one of them.
Right.
And it comes in and eats them. I mean, obviously it's not hero, but I mean, without killing that raptor, people would have died.
All right, so we're back. And, so we're discussing the T-Rex in Jurassic Park and, kind of being sort of the villain, the big bad, and kind of switching sides. And, we see that every once in a while. Like, I think we saw that in Puppet Master, the puppets and Puppet Master, the first one were bad guys. Then after that, they turned heel and became good guys, right? Like, they were just good and became forces of good, right? So, kind of in your head, when does sci-fi become horror? Because obviously you can have science fiction and you can have people die. What kind of is that line for you? We go, okay, this is turning into horror, is when the body count gets higher, when we have like the tropes that we see in horror start appearing in sci-fi.
Yeah. I mean, and when sci-fi becomes horror, there's always that point where I think the tables turn, right? Like you look at Event Horizon, it's very clear, when it becomes horror that they're like outmatched. They have no way to like fight this weird, hell energy, right? They're like, okay, what can we do? So like the only idea they have is like, let's blow up the ship, right? That's all they have. Right. That's the only thing they can do is blow it up. Even if we all die, this ship needs to go away. And that's, like a very, final fatal thing. It's mostly fear takes over at that point, right? And they're just scared of what's going to happen to them, what's going to happen to the world if it gets away,
Right.
I think that's the thing, like in Aliens, right? I mean, when does it turn from horror to sci-fi? I think it's at the point where they say, hey, you can't shoot in there.
Right.
And now it's like you have this, these trained military force that has been on, bug hunts, as they say, before, so they've obviously hunted some kind of alien creatures before, but it was on their terms, right? They had their weapons, they had their, their methods and stuff like that. And then what happens? Like, oh yeah, you're in a nuclear reactor. You can't shoot because you might hit the coolant system and then everybody blows up, right? Everybody's dead.
Right.
So yeah, they have to like unload all their guns. So now the tables have turned, right? That's, I think, when it becomes horror. And it becomes very clear because it gets a lot darker at that point, right? Because you start getting the jump scares, you start getting, the creepy music, you start seeing the walls moving around and shit. I think that's the point to me where it turns horror. And I think in every sci-fi becoming horror, it always ends up that way. It starts off as like your typical sci-fi, sometimes even action-y movie. And then at whatever point it shifts, those tables turn to where it becomes fear instead of, bravery.
So would you throw, let's say, Pandorum, Doom, Resident Evil into the same spot?
Yeah. I mean, well, Pandorum, I would say, switches pretty quickly, right?
Right.
But in the very beginning, it is. It's like they wake up, hey, what's going on? Like obviously something's up with the ship. Something's going on. We got to try to fix this. We got to try to figure out what's going on. And I think, I would say even, I would say when he gets into the ceiling and he starts getting like stuck,
right?
That's when the movie starts to shift. And then when he finally comes down and he sees the creature or the guy that was trapped that first time, I think that's where it like totally shifts. Where you see like, okay, this is very bad. This is there's no way that this can go well. That has become horror. So it shifts pretty quickly. I mean, that's in the first 15 minutes of the movie,
right?
So that shifts pretty quickly. What was the other one you mentioned?
Doom. I mean, obviously Doom is a horror video game, but the movie Doom with The Rock and Carl Urban, they're transported to Mars, and they go in there to a facility that is of unknown, lab experiments essentially, right? That they don't know what exactly is going on, and then I think it does, become the what you want to call it, the Hellions, or the demon spawns in the game. I mean, I think it takes a while. It's a pretty good sci-fi movie, going into it.
Yeah, I mean, it tries to remain sci-fi until they finally explain what they're doing,
right?
And then you realize, oh, like these are demons like from hell. I mean, Doom still holds on to a little bit of that kind of action heart, right? So where like at least they can fight them,
right.
At least they have the weapons to fight. I mean, obviously bad things happen, and it doesn't end well for most people, but at least they can fight with their own weapons. But yeah, there definitely is that same horror.
Yeah, and I'd say another last example I would have. I mean, we can go on forever with this list. Yeah. Resident Evil, because I think the first part of the movie plays out is, you have Alice and you have the other guy waking up. They're kind of amnesic state. They don't know what, past what day of events that happened. And I think it takes a long while to even see the first zombie. I mean, regardless of what people think of this movie, how close it is to the game, but they're essentially going against an unstoppable AI that they can't do anything about. You know what I mean? Like, especially that tunnel scene with the laser grid.
Right.
That's before they even get zombies. Zombies is only in not even the last half, maybe the last third of the movie before we get the zombies in Resident Evil. So atmospherically, you're going against, the Red Queen AI and trying to figure out what's going on there. And so I think it's very sci-fi. And then, then all of a sudden they have the guy, Matt, is in the room trying to get vials, and that's where a body just floats up from the water and becomes zombies, and then goes into horror at that point in time.
Yeah, that's when it shifts. Like that's when those tables turn to where they're no longer in control. They have now it's like fear. It's like just get out. You just need to escape. Yeah,
so I think we can, kind of move on to the flip side of this is horror becoming sci-fi. I know you have an example in there if you want to discuss it.
I do. And obviously we discussed this previously, but I would say, the best example I could think of would be Predator, right? I mean, obviously it starts off as more of an action movie, right?
Right.
But it does shift to horror. Right, after the action part of it, then it shifts to horror. Like, this thing is hunting them one by one. It becomes a slasher at that section of the movie, right? Yeah. They're being picked off one by one. They don't know what's going on. They're trying to figure it out. And then it becomes sci-fi once you realize that the Predator is an alien, right? I mean, he's an alien from another planet here hunting. So, yeah, I mean, it's a horror movie, but based in sci-fi elements. So, at the end when they finally fight, and he blows up,
right?
All that kind of stuff. I mean, that's that's your classic sci-fi ending. Big explosion, hero jumping away.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say that almost Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? Would you say that is horror becoming sci-fi because of the pods and it being aliens. I don't think we ever really told it's aliens, were we? We just know it's pods.
Yeah. I don't think they say where they start coming from, but yeah, I mean, either they came from somewhere else or they were like some kind of dormant or
Right.
minority species on Earth that somehow took over. But yeah, no, it starts off as horror, like obviously something's happening to people, right?
Right.
They slowly figure out that some people are being replaced or at least acting very very strangely. Kind of your horror atmosphere, and then when they finally do figure out what's going on, oh yeah, it's like giant bug cocoons,
Right.
which is definitely a sci-fi thing.
Starship Troopers, sci-fi action. I think there's some horror elements. The train troops. You can argue how well their training was. Once they get on site, to the first part, right? If you want to call it what a barracks essentially, or science, this is a science facility. That you have the giant hole in the ground, and they kind of realize that they can't win against these bugs. There's too many, and people start getting killed. I'd say pretty gruesomely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you think that that's kind of in that horror becomes sci-fi because then you get more into the the DNA, the genetics of the different bug species, and all obviously all big propaganda parody of things, right?
Right. I mean, I would say, it could be like horror elements. Would it be more of like the horror of war, right?
Right.
There's definitely horror elements of like the brain bug like controlling people. I mean, that's terrifying, right?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like all the bugs flooding in and dying. I mean, yeah, there's definitely horror elements of it, but again, it's more of like the horror of war element. Like this is a war that they're fighting and they're not doing well.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it definitely has elements of it. I can see that.
So the question I really have is, is any horror movie that deals with aliens or outer space, is that always going to be towing that line? Do you feel between sci-fi and horror, just because of sci-fi being what it is? I mean, not necessarily. I think if it's aliens or space, it's generally going to have some sci-fi elements, while other things exist like creature features, or even like the original Westworld movie, where it is science fiction, it's robots, but it is horror still, and it's not aliens. But I'm thinking, with space and aliens, is it always destined to toe that line?
I mean, it is. I mean, it's just because, in sci-fi, you're talking about things that haven't happened yet. I mean,
right.
Technology that does not exist yet. So if you're in space doing things, it's going to be sci-fi simply because there's not much we can do in space right now. As far as like living or allowing horror elements in there.
Right.
Where you're talking like, ships that you can like walk around and there's places to hide in, stuff like that. Like that, obviously we don't have that yet. Then so yeah, I mean, even, like again, like laboratories and, monsters like that, things like that. I mean, we don't have those things yet. So in order for a sci-fi horror, it's always going to toe that line simply because, the things that don't exist yet are there. I mean, elements of sci-fi are going to be there. It's in the mix. It's going to be one of the elements of the movie.
Right. I mean, yeah, I think it's just going to be that case. And I don't necessarily have problems with that stuff, obviously, because there's some really great things. Like, we discussed that we both like sci-fi and horror, just varying degrees for each other, right, of what we like more. So I'm going to kind of change a little bit topics, but still dealing with horror in space. Is why must everyone go to space, right? Do we think it's, for examples, we have Critters 4, we have Leprechaun 4, we have Hellraiser 4, we have Jason X. Do you think that at some point, all these take place 90s, except Jason X was like 2001. Do you think that they're going to space because we got tired of, the situation on Earth, that we are now realizing we can, that path, that trope is no longer scary, so they put in the element of space where it has the unknown as just a different backdrop? Or do you think it's just a ploy that writers are just run out of ideas with at some point and everyone goes to space?
I mean, I think there's elements of both there. I mean, I would lean towards they just didn't have any more ideas. And so one guy was like, hey, let's put him in space. I mean, I don't know who did it first. I don't where they got the idea from, but like, hey, like let's put them in space. And then when the other guys ran out of ideas, they're like, well, hey, we haven't done space yet. I mean, so then they just jumped right into that.
I mean,
so I think that's what it is. So I mean, I don't think it's all of it. I think there's elements of both, but I think it's more of yes, it's a thing for them to do that they haven't done yet.
Right. Now, I would argue that Critters of the four that I named makes the most sense as they are aliens. Right? They are from space, and it makes sense that, bring the fight to them type thing. That's not what happened, obviously, but the idea would make sense in the Critters franchise is they're aliens. They come from space. What happens when we go there? Leprechaun, I think, had no business going to space.
No. Yeah, I mean, Critters is, I mean, they made it clear from the very first episode that they came from space. So,
right.
Yeah, it wasn't that big of a shock that they ended up in space. But yeah, Leprechaun, I mean, again, a Leprechaun, I think they just ran out of ideas. I don't know what is happening with Leprechaun. I mean, there's, I don't even know how to describe some of the versions of Leprechaun and how, in my opinion, terrible they are. But
they have a place. They have a place in my heart. They do.
I'm just saying, I always fight against that super cheese that tries to be like self-aware, and I don't think Leprechaun does it well. I mean, hey, you can have your own opinion. That's just my opinion. I don't think Leprechaun does it well. I don't think most of the Leprechaun movies are good enough for me to watch. I'm sure far enough timeline, we might do Leprechaun show
around St. Patty's Day.
I'll have to watch them again. But as far as right now, as I've seen quite a few of them, not all of them, quite a few of them, they just keep getting worse, in my opinion.
Right, and Critters 4 was kind of the end of the Critters franchise for a very long time, up until recently. Leprechaun 4 put a halt on the Leprechaun series until he went to the Hood and back to the Hood, and then came back with WWE Star, and now back with a whole revival thing, which we'll get into a little bit later. But it's almost like the ending movie of a franchise. It's like the final nail, right? It's either, you see the final whatever, right? Or then they go to space. Like Jason X, realistically, I feel, until Freddy vs. Jason, but as a franchise, killed the Friday the 13th. It was so bad.
Well, yeah, but it was also Jason X felt like a fan fiction. It really, it was all over the place, and there was just all these like goofy characters that were just ridiculous. I mean, I understand it was supposed to be sci-fi in space, but like, I mean, the android and like, it's just so bad.
So, do you think that, with horror and the sci-fi, that's better towing the line, blurring that line between them when that's the original thing versus a standard? A lot of these are slashers that they end up going to space. Like, it seems so out of left field that it really doesn't fit in, especially when they go back to the roots, as most of these do, of the slasher franchises, right? That this seems like that one-off type scenario, and I would say that these are probably some of the weakest entries in these franchises is when they take it and try to make it sci-fi versus Aliens or Predator. That's always been that line, right? That's always been there.
Yeah, I mean, Aliens Predator, again, it was built around that,
right?
So I mean, yeah, it's not a surprise even if it shifts one way or shifts the other way. As long as both of those elements are there, it's okay. It's fine. It's always lived in that realm between the worlds, right?
Right.
But yeah, you have something like Leprechaun or Jason, or Friday the 13th or Hellraiser. It's these things have always been like purely on the horror side. So when you try to straddle that line, when there's no lore or no like previous event that even happened, even remotely sci-fi, they try to like inject that into it, and it can work if you do it in. I would say in those you'd probably have to do a very small dose, right? I mean, being in space is not necessarily bad, but you don't have to go super sci-fi with goofy androids and I mean,
Right.
like the weird superhero, space marines that they had. I mean, just goofy characters. It didn't need to be like that. It could have been way different.
And I honestly, off the top of my head, I can't think of any movie where it goes into the sci-fi realm that's a horror thing that works well. That doesn't start off that way and ventures into it. That's just not good.
Yeah, I mean, out of the list, I would say Hellraiser does it the best, but it's still not great.
Right. I mean, you could argue that at that point, Hellraiser 4 would be a tie-in to Event Horizon at that point, right? It's just kind of like their sister movies.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. I can see that. I mean, but at least Hellraiser, they always have interesting characters, interesting, Cenobite creatures and stuff. At least there's something interesting about it. The other ones really don't have that much going for them.
Right, and we'll definitely get to these franchises at some point. Hellraiser, especially sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears and go into slashers, right? How important is a story to slasher? I know we briefly discussed this when we were discussing slashers, I think our first episode. But how do you feel about the importance of story?
Story for a slasher, I mean, realistically, it doesn't matter. Because if you look at, the success rate of these slashers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most of the most successful slashers out there really don't have a whole lot of story going on.
Right.
I mean, like Halloween, the very first Halloween had like nothing.
Correct.
I mean, it was just guy coming to kill people. There was no backstory. I mean, there was a very, very poor backstory, if I'm being honest, of a terrible child psychologist who just like met some kid that was like, oh, this kid's kind of messed up. And then he just did nothing. And then hey, decades later, the kid becomes a murderer. Oh, I couldn't have seen that coming, even though I did nothing in the meantime. I mean, again, but there's no real backstory there. I mean, yeah, that the child psychologist is there to tell you he's just a bad kid. He's just evil. That's it. That's all. That's the only backstory is that he's a bad kid. He's evil.
Now,
story over.
Now, do you think it's because generally slashers were made in such a low budget and a lot of people's especially the first ones in slashers, that they just don't have the funding to build the lore background behind it, so therefore the story isn't that big?
I don't know. I don't know if that's fair to say, because I mean, you look at Nightmare on Elm Street, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of lore behind that. I mean, obviously in the first one, not a lot of it is coming out because, basically, Freddy is, this bad character, but he like, lives in dreams, and you get the rules of the dreams, that, if you're asleep, it's his world. If you're awake, it's your world. I mean, at least there's like rules, and it's interesting, and there's some backstory, some world building. There's some stuff going on, right?
Right.
Friday the 13th. I mean, even at least they had the very first one had a twist in it, right?
Right.
It wasn't just a generic slasher of, some nameless guy murdering people and they don't know why. I mean, it essentially was, but at least there was that twist of like, oh, it's a character that you've seen, walking around. Like, this is a character that I mean, obviously that changed in the later versions, but, in the first one, I mean, there was some story. Again, there's not a lot of story going on there. That's why I'd say, like, you look at all the slashers out there, their success doesn't really matter about how much story or backstory or interesting things are happening. It doesn't really matter. It just matters if it's made well and, gives you that classic, slasher, suspense and fear. That's basically what makes it. The story doesn't make it, but I mean, obviously, in my mind, it adds more to it, but not a lot of people feel that way.
I mean, do we think that, or going with Wes Craven with Nightmare on Elm Street, and obviously he started the Scream franchise, which has an awful lot of story for a slasher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, is it Wes Craven? Is it his film style? Obviously Wes Craven did movies before, Nightmare on Elm Street, but like Sean Cunningham didn't do a lot of things before Friday the 13th. How many movies did John Carpenter really do before Halloween? They weren't necessarily as seasoned veterans, if you will, as Wes Craven did by the time he did Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream. Is just kind of like putting your name out there, and slashers are the quickest, cheapest way to make a buck, right?
Yeah, realistically, John Carpenter had a couple movies before, but they were both like action movies.
Right.
They were not horror movies at all. There's no horror elements in them.
Right.
But Halloween, again, probably having, I don't know if it's the least amount of story out of all the classic slashers, but he's definitely in the top 5, right?
Yeah.
And it was extremely successful and very well made. I'm not trying to say that it takes away from the movie at all. It's a great movie. It doesn't need that story because it does good without it. And again, going by, how successful they are, going by ratings, going by, money making, all that kind of stuff. All of those things say it doesn't matter. So realistically, it doesn't.
Right. But you would just say that a lack of story makes it more mysterious, more suspenseful, therefore more terrifying, if you will. To not have an answer for why this is happening.
It can, and you know what? It's okay if you don't have all the answers, because I think that's something that some people don't like, but I think the majority of people don't need things spoon fed to them, right? I think they enjoy when they get to figure things out a little bit.
Right.
Themselves, or at least have that wiggle room to like have your own kind of theory and your own, story of what goes on and what happens. I think when it gets bad is when the story is written a certain way, right? You have your A to B in the original story, and then somebody comes along and says, "Hey, we need to make this mysterious. Let's just omit information, right? Let's look at this story and this script, and let's just take out information. We're going to add unnecessary artificial suspense and mystery by just removing critical plot information." And it's happened to, a lot of movies, a lot of shows. I think that's when it's bad, is when the story is written with these things there, and then you take them away. It feels like something's missing. Now, you can write these stories knowingly not giving all the information, and it can be done well. Like the first Hellraiser. When you watch it, that you're only scraping the surface of that world, right?
Right.
There's a lot more weird stuff going on in that wherever dimension that Pinhead came from.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know all that stuff. We only know the little bit that's happening right now, and it's okay. That's all you need to know for that story. But there's a lot more behind the curtain, and that's okay. That's the way it was written. That's the way it was made. And you get other movies. I'm just going to use Prometheus as an example, is where it was written with, and filmed, honestly, with all this information there to give you what is happening and what's going on. And then you have people that come in later and say, "Hey, I'm just going to remove critical plot information to make this more suspenseful. Let's make this more suspenseful. Let's make this more of a mystery, and just remove the audio from like the last 10 minutes of the movie, so they put like weird, creepy music over it so you don't hear what's being said and what's going on. And then just don't tell you what the alien's saying, even though in the original script we know what he's saying."
Right.
Yeah, just stuff like that. And that's when it makes it bad, in my opinion. I'm not saying Prometheus is a bad movie. It wasn't. I'm just saying I think it was missing something. It felt like it was missing something, and that's why.
So you're saying that you want your J.J. Abrams and your, was it Lindoff or from Lost to make a horror movie because you thoroughly enjoy that?
Okay, well, yes. Lindelof, to be fair, he has done a lot of, omitting critical plot information, but he has done some good things lately. So I'm trying to forgive him for his past misdeeds. But yeah, he seemed to like to do that, as he would just like, "Hey, I'm going to make this mysterious by just, cutting away, plot information that's supposed to be there, but just leave it out."
Right. But onto our, talking about stories and slash and stuff like that. Do you feel as a movie franchises out that you need to add story to it to explain things? Because, going back with Nightmare on Elm Street, really great backstory. And eventually we just starting into the point where there is no story anymore. It just becomes the slasher. So we start off with a lot of lore and it dwindles off. I think happens with Friday the 13th. We have a lot of lore, and honestly, after number 2, there's not much of a story after that, right? Nothing's added to it.
Yeah, nothing's added to it until later when you get to like, well, you know, when it starts, they start to like allude to him being like a demon and
Deadite.
you know,
Yeah.
and they start having like, you know, like military strike teams taking him out and knowing what kind of thing he is and all that. I mean, it gets weird, but yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of evolution of his character. I mean, from like 3 to 8. I mean, it was like the same, you know, movie. I mean, it was obviously
3 to 9.
different characters, but like, but it was essentially no more information was ever found out about Jason at all. It was just different things. You know, he would kill different groups of people is essentially what it
was. But in spite of that, you know, they were trying out like they did 8 of them or 9 of them in the 80s itself.
Yeah, no, it was like one a year. I mean, they were cranking them out, and and they're not necessarily bad. I mean, I'd say as they go along, they drop off in quality, but they're still, you know, popcorn, you know, movies. I mean, you know, it's something to watch, you know, something, you know, to pass the time. They're not necessarily bad, but they're not, you know, as good as they were either.
Right, because Jason Goes to Hell is where we get more that implied that he is a Deadite from the Evil Dead, because we have the Kandarian dagger, we have Necronomicon, very little Jason Voorhees as Jason Voorhees as opposed to being possessed, and arguably, once again, killed the franchise for almost a decade.
Right.
With that. And I honestly would say that it's probably, besides Jason X, one of the weakest entries in that franchise.
Yeah, and that's why I think the ideal sequels in a slasher universe, they give you little nuggets, little tidbits, right? You know, so like each movie that comes out, it doesn't have to spell out their whole story because again, you didn't really need it in the original. You don't really need it in the sequel either.
Right.
But you know, you want to appease everybody. So you don't, you know, just, you know, spew out this huge backstory, right? And make it take up the whole movie. So you figure out who they are and where they came from. Just a little tidbits, little nuggets, you know,
right.
Find out like, you know, where they're from or, you know, it's other things besides they like to murder people, right? Any other information becomes something to build on.
Right.
So anything other than that, I think that's what they do. Do they all do that? No, not at all. I mean, as we've seen from 3 to 9 and the Friday the 13th universe, nothing happened.
Right.
As far as you know, character development for him, he was the same exact character. Nothing new was learned.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's how it is. I mean, in the Hellraiser universe, at least you would find out more about, you know, the Cenobite kind of dimension or the box. You know, you'd learn again little tidbits. You get little nuggets. You know, you wouldn't get a whole lot, but you get little bits and pieces.
Right.
I think that's what makes it good, because then the people that are like, oh, I want to know more about this universe, I want to know more about this world, they get their little bits, but then the slasher people also get their story too.
Right. I know we want to discuss, I mean, we'll get into it when we have the 3 or 4 part episode of the Halloween franchise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very, very much mystery shrouded in the first Halloween. Number 2, we find out there's a reason for him going after, you know, Laurie Strode, that's brother. And then we get 3, you know, we're not going to discuss too much. And Curse of Michael Myers. We get a whole bunch of lore. Whole bunch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, other than Halloween Resurrection, arguably one of the worst Halloween movies.
Right.
Where we get a whole bunch of lore.
Well, I think, again, it's because, you know, I said the ideal sequel in that slasher world is you get a little bit of you get little nuggets, right? Little tidbits, little tastes. And I think there was really, I mean, there was that. They did that in the second one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously they added more, but there was still a lot left to be known, you know, like why, you know, right? Like we still don't know all of the elements of this. The third one, obviously, complete departure, right?
Right.
It has nothing to do with Michael Myers at all. And then they come back hard, right? Because, I mean, 3 did not do well.
Correct.
Again, I mean, I know they were going for an anthology thing, but if you're going for an anthology thing, you have to do that with everyone. You can't do 1 and 2 being Michael Myers and then 3 being the anthology. That doesn't make sense. You know, you're confusing people, and that's like understandably upset. I get that. So 3, I mean, again, I don't think it was that bad of a movie by itself, but it being in the Halloween franchise, yes, obviously. But yeah, well, we're not going to discuss that too much on this. But again, you got too much information in 4 after, again, a movie that didn't contain them at all, and then 2, which only had some tastes of what is going on, and then 4th just answered all the questions that were asked, and then went in the wrong direction, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I know a big talking point for your note of making horror peers angry is Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
So we can we'll be discussing more of it and on the rewatch. Maybe I'll have different opinion on the rewatch.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, as we discussed before, is so much lore was added to it, right? And I know people, I'm one of them, that just really didn't care for the movie. That, I would argue that, Curse of Michael Myers did so much lore that they had to reset and bring back Laurie Strode. And, I know Rob Zombie was doing what he did. Like I said, we'll discuss more in the Halloween episodes, but I honestly feel it was too much lore. It got rid of everything. Yeah, I know they made him more human, but that's not what I don't feel the franchise was about.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna keep it brief. I mean, obviously, we'll get further in this debate, but I mean, mine is that it was too late when they brought that stuff in the original, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 4 was where they answered big questions. It was way too late. Obviously, you even had a movie in there that had nothing to do with Michael Myers at all. Way too late. Again, it came out of nowhere. Too much. Too late. Everybody was upset. It turned off the whole franchise. Now, when Rob Zombie rebuilt it, right? I mean, he wanted to include all of that. But again, if you know where things are going from the beginning, as we do with Halloween at that time, he wanted to go back and put all of that together to make a coherent narrative, right?
Right.
Because, in the original, you have 1, 2, unrelated 3, and then 4 with, extremely heavy story. So he just took all of those, I mean, obviously minus 3, and then tried to retroactively put them into an order that makes sense. And I mean, obviously he added more to it. I mean, again, like you said, it makes it like a human story rather than just this supernatural bad person. Like I said, Donald Pleasance is like the worst child psychologist ever. I mean, he literally he doesn't even attempt to try to save the kid at all. He just, the bad kid, kill him.
Right.
That's it. That's his whole plan.
He must die.
From the beginning, he just met the kid once. He's like, nope, this kid needs to die. This is a bad kid. I mean, that's not what child psychology is supposed to do. You're supposed to try to help the kid. Anyway, but yeah, I think that's what he did. He tried to make a coherent story. Just, I mean, I know you don't want to hear that, but stay true to where the franchise was going. I understand that, nobody likes 3 or 4 in that realm. I get it. But he was trying to make a coherent narrative out of all this stuff that did happen and try to make it make sense and then move forward from there.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what he was trying to do. But again, he was building that universe with all this information already known. We already know from the very first one, you don't need that story, right? It was very successful. It was very great. I mean, a lot of people consider it to be the greatest horror movie ever, or at least of the 80s, right?
Right.
And it had very, very little story. And I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. You don't necessarily need that. He just did a different version of it. He put more story into it, and people that liked the original that didn't have the story have the numbers to back them. I'm not going to say that they don't, but people like me that prefer more story, prefer more background, explain how this happened. I think I like it.
Yeah.
But I know I'm in the minority on that, and that's okay. And I know that wasn't as brief as I wanted it to be.
No, like I said, we'll discuss it more in the episodes of the Halloween franchise, which we'll be getting up to number 13, I believe, it's the new one. So, let's change gears a little bit, right? atmosphere versus substance. I know we touched briefly in your first love. We briefly discussed it in the before times. Is being the visual medium that it is. Do you like more atmosphere versus necessarily dialogue? I'm getting at the world building through visuals versus story substance. Do you think do you prefer one or over the other? Do you think you have both without it being too long of a movie?
Well, I mean, what do they say? The old what the old writing adage is like show, don't tell.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, in the perfect world, I mean, you'd have both, right? I mean, you should have both. I mean, they both have their place. They both have their reason. I would say specifically for horror, I would say it's more of a visual medium, honestly.
Right.
I mean, there you got your creepy suspense, your people sneaking around, your darkness. I mean, these are all visual elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
The jump scares, all that stuff is visual. I mean, I guess there's an auditory element to it too, but yeah, I would say it's more of a visual medium. So I would say in the horror genre specifically, yeah, I would say, yeah, the visuals would count more. I would say. I mean, obviously, I like both, but I guess the successful horror doesn't need that. So,
well, I mean, especially in, let's say, slashers, or touch briefly back on that, is at some point in time, the survivors, the people who are left alive, are trying to be as quiet as possible. So, you're gonna have more atmosphere, you're gonna have more acting with visual cues and the sights and the sounds versus dialogue, right? And that's you're being quiet. And I'd say the older stuff gets away with it. You can actually have silence. There's so many movies, especially slashers, that there's silence for like 20, 30 minutes of the movie. There's no dialogue being spoken, and it's all visual cues. Right? And you can see that now, I think, with movies like Hereditary, or I'd even say Midsummer. There's a lot of visual stuff, especially in those two movies, right? That
A Quiet Place.
Right. That you can have a story with not a lot of dialogue, but you're building atmosphere, right? You're getting the tension with that. And, what are your thoughts of that part of it? Do you like when there's more talking? Do you like when there's just silence and it's more tension building into it?
I mean, I think they both have their place. But I would say specifically for the horror genre, I would say atmosphere matters more. I would say, I mean, it is like you said, I mean, like you have like The Quiet Place, right? Like over half the movie, there's no talking, right? I mean, but yeah, a lot of horror movies, they have to be quiet. There's a lot of sneaking around, so like a lot of the only sounds going on is like, the person that they're hiding from, is walking footsteps or,
right,
banging on things and stuff like that. I mean, those are the only things that you're hearing, and it's all visual. So yeah, I mean, with horror specifically, I mean, with the best horror, I would say atmosphere matters a lot more. I mean, obviously other genres, substance matters more. I would say in the horror genre, atmosphere matters a lot more.
Right. So how do you, like I said, there's quietness generally in the older 70s, 80s, and 90s stuff. I feel, in my opinion, that there's oversaturation of music and sound effects being played instead of that silence, that you don't know if some of those noises are supposed to be known to the characters in that movie, or if it's solely for us to build the tension with us, right?
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what they're doing. They make you, the sound and the music is supposed to make you uncomfortable. It's supposed to speak to you. It's supposed to like put your mind in that space where it should be.
Right.
Like when you're watching, like a horror movie, when you're watching, like a disturbing part or like a suspenseful part, right? That music is a big part of what puts you there. You get suspenseful, you get like these weird, like high pitched kind of almost uncomfortable tones, right?
Right.
And that's putting your brain and you in this like uncomfortable position so that you can feel a little bit of what you're supposed to feel in the movie. And then you get like other genres where you have like, like epics, stuff like that. They have these big swooping orchestral movements, right?
Right.
And you get that emotional swell, right?
Mhm.
Your eyes get glassy because you're feeling all that emotion. That music is helping you get there. I mean, obviously the movie has to do its job too to make you feel like you're at that moment, right? But the music is a big part of what brings that out. And so, yeah, and the horror element, yeah, I mean, it's you get those weird sounds that, I mean, sometimes you don't even realize it's happening. It's done behind the scenes, and that's why when you have a good, sound person, a good, scorer person, they can really make you feel what they want you to feel, put you in that right place.
Now, do you like I said? I don't. The music's fine. I don't like. I understand the auditory cues that they're trying to invoke in you. I don't like the sounds that if you hear, sometimes there's bumps and thumps that, you don't necessarily know if the characters are hearing or if it's just for you. If it's trying to direct your eyes to something else or to involve you with it. But I almost feel like maybe this is why some people that are newer to horror that, the past 15 years of horror find the older stuff so boring is because we don't have that filler, right? We don't have the necessarily auditorial cues in that. We just have silence instead.
Well, and that's why in any genre, I would say, because any person that's making a movie, right? A person making that movie is going to be a student of film in at least some way, shape, or form, right?
Right.
And in order to be a student of film, you have to go to your roots. So if you're making horror movies, of course you're going to go to the roots of horror, right? To see how the people of the past successfully did this before. I mean, that's the best way for you to learn. That's the best way for you to build on it. And if you're coming in trying to watch horror now without knowing where it came from, I think you're going to miss a lot of stuff. I mean, I think that's just one aspect that you'll miss. I think you're going to miss a lot of stuff.
Right. And, and as we discussed, some of the earliest movies were horror movies in the silent film era, and there was no sound, and it was all atmosphere, right? And, a little bit of reading, but, they were able to tell the story essentially through play. It was a big sound stage, it was a big play.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I mean, especially with silent movies, music was the only way they had to communicate to you,
right?
Besides the visual. So, like, yeah, there was certain, notes or certain, like, I don't know, accompaniment that they would have to kind of try to put you. I mean, obviously, that was in its infancy; they didn't know what did these things yet, but there was a lot of people learning and trying to figure it out. It's like, you play certain things or certain tones or certain songs, you're going to make people feel a certain way. You're going to put people in a certain mindset.
Right.
And then that's where you're going to go. Obviously now there's been like 100 years of people experimenting with this. So obviously there's a lot of people that know what they're doing. And that's why there's a lot of people that, you always see the same names doing movie soundtracks and scores and stuff. It's because they're good at what they do.
Right.
So they keep getting more work.
Now, do you feel it's cheating where we have the sound, but the frequencies that we don't register, but we still technically hear them? That gives us feeling nerve. Do you feel that's a cheat in horror movies?
No, I mean, it's not a cheat; it's a tool. I mean, if you have tools at your disposal that can put someone's mind in a place that you want them to be, I mean, that's a good thing. I mean, as long as you're not like, injecting them with sodium pentothal, like trying to like, change their mind from what they want to be. I mean, as long as you're not doing that. I mean, again, if you're just using tools, audio cues, visual cues, all these things to like just shift your perspective or change your state of mind. Yeah. I mean, those are just tools in the toolbox. I don't think it's cheating.
So what do you think is your most visually appeasing horror movie for atmosphere, including atmosphere, visual, and auditory?
Geez. I mean, there's a lot of them that I really like. I mean, you mentioned Hereditary earlier. I think that one is visually a great movie.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, I mean, recently the one that I liked the most, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but is It Follows.
Yes.
I like the way that everything is visually placed in that movie. It's almost like nostalgic and modern at the same time.
Well, there's not very much technology. All the person really technology wise is like the one clamshell cell phone, right? that you don't know
like a
what
reader,
that
right,
you
yeah.
don't know what it could be any decade for the past 30 years. You don't really know.
Right. But I think it was just, I don't know, the way that they filmed it, the way that it was presented, I think it was fantastic. Like, I think, like I think my favorite scene is, the very first scene where you know, the main actress, she like first becomes aware of what's going on, right? The guy's got her like tied to that chair,
Right.
and he's like showing her what's going on. I mean, just the way that was filmed, like they're up on like, you know, like a second floor of like a broken down apartment building,
Right. Yep.
and he's like, you know, just watch, you know, and then you see this person like just walking forward. I mean, it was very, very well done, and it got its point across, right? There wasn't a whole lot like, you know, said, presented there. I mean, obviously It Follows doesn't have a whole lot of backstory. I mean, there's enough,
Right.
but I mean, there's not, you don't know what it is or where it came from or why or any of that stuff. You just know what it does. That's it. And I think that's what makes it, it's just, you know, plain horror in that way.
Right. And
But yeah, I think it was just a great way to open it up and say it. Like I said, visually, I thought it looked great. You know, I thought it put you in the right spot.
right. I mean, you can probably guess not newer horror movie, but atmospherically for visual and auditory cues what mine is. It's going to be obviously Evil Dead. I think he was really good with this camera work, with his scenery, with his auditory cues, and you know, because he does a lot of different visual styles, and like, you know, the pounding of the clock with Cheryl, you know, where she's drawing, you know, getting possessed and starts drawing on her paper, and just, you know, all the sounds of like the clock, especially the clock pendulum hitting the sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's very loud noise, but just the sequence, I think, is very unnerving as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, he also did a lot of interesting things visually. Is, you know, he put a camera on a bike,
Right,
and then rode it through the house, you know, to get that visual thing that he was looking for. Or he put the camera on the 2x4,
right,
and he had like two guys hold each side and just like run through to get the right angle, the right visual thing that he was looking for. So yeah, even though he didn't have the right tools for the job, he did what he, you know, could do to tell the story that he wanted to show you.
right. And he invented a lot of camera techniques that are being used that he just out of necessity, right?
Right. But yeah, but visually he knew what he wanted to tell, right? He knew that story he wanted to tell visually, and you know, he did whatever he had to do to get it done.
Right. So, you know, our next talking point, gore versus plot.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, with horror, I mean, especially in slashers, I mean, gore is king, right?
Right.
I mean, again, go back to Halloween. You know, there's a lot of murder, a lot of blood, a lot of death, but there's no plot, right? It's just some guy with a knife killing people. Nobody knows why. Nobody finds out why. It's just, that's all it is. I mean, and so many slashers are very, very similar, right? You might get a little bit of twist on who the person that's killing them is, but like the gore and the deaths is like the reason you're watching it. I mean, that's the reason why slashers exist, is basically for that.
Right. But then you have stuff like The Thing, which is very plot heavy and very gory and visual in it, right? A lot of body horror. I think,
right, which is why I really like The Thing, because for me, I mean, when these things, both of these things exist, that's the ideal scenario. But in the horror world, you don't need both. It just, in my mind, it makes it better if you have both.
right?
If it's done well. I'm not saying, you know, just plain more plot is good. No, it has to be done in the right way. But
have you ever watched a horror movie and go, "This is too much"? Gore, body horror.
No. I mean, I know it's a movie. I know it's fake. I know a lot of people have trouble separating it because, you know, they can, you know, see that, you know, at least real elements of it, right? Or they may have like experienced something similar to that or seen something similar to that, and it bothers people. I get that. I'm not saying people are weak for not understanding that it's fake. I get there's a lot of triggers that could make it worse for you. But for me, yeah, I know that it's fake. So, I mean, there's things that disturb me, sure. So, you know, horrible things that happen. It's like, wow, I don't ever want to see that again. But I get it. I mean, there's I've never gotten to the point where I don't want to watch it or I've stopped watching it because of it.
Right. Well, I mean, we can go Eli Roth movies or the Saw franchise, right? I'd argue that the first Saw franchise, really deep plot, gore, but not as gory as what the franchise becomes, obviously, right?
Yeah, and the first one, they left a lot to the imagination. You know, I mean, obviously they showed you some bad things, but there was a lot of things that they didn't like show you. Like, you know, like the guy that was trapped in like the razor wire box, right? They didn't show the guy getting sliced up by the razor wire. You got to see like the ending of it, but you didn't have to watch it happen. Whereas a lot of the later ones, you did get to see everything that happened. Every single death you watched.
I mean, do you think that made the movie? I mean, obviously they made 8 of them, and the numbers speak for themselves. But I don't know. It maybe it's because of our age. Maybe it's because of what we grew up with. I really prefer the body horror of the 70s, 80s, and 90s more than the torture porn that's out now. I mean, yeah, it looks more realistic nowadays for the most part, unless you start using CGI blood everywhere for bullets and stuff like that. But you know, I feel like the gore factor in the 80s I like it more than the torture porn that existed for, you know, the mid-aughts, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer it that way too. I mean, I think it's more of it because, you know, in the 80s and even most of the 90s, you can tell it's fake, right? You can tell that these things are not real. And I think as things evolve, as things get better, I mean, obviously these, you know, effects guys are going to get better at their craft, right? I mean, that's how things work. You know, people build on what people have done before them, and overall we move forward and everybody gets better. So yeah, I mean, as things get more realistic, I think they can be more disturbing, and I think that's a big element. You can easily twist that, right? You can easily make a lot of people uncomfortable and make a lot of people scared by making, you know, horrible body horror things happen. You know what I mean? Like making that stuff look as real as possible. Like you start getting to the level of like, you know, Hostel, to where like, it looks pretty real, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, we're at the point where like, you know, the blind between, you know, knowing it's fake and maybe it's real is starting to fade out. And I think that's what's making a lot of people uncomfortable with where it's going now. I think that's what it is. It's just that the line of that blur of reality is starting to move, you know, in the wrong direction. And again, I mean, it speaks to their craft. I mean, they're great at what they do. I mean, these people are doing fantastic, amazing things. It just, you know, your brain doesn't want to see that stuff. I mean, it's an instinctual thing. Like, you know, hey, this is bad.
Right. I mean, do you think gore is a way to overwrite the plot? Do you think that they use that for more, like as we discussed before, slashers, it's kill after kill, right? You're there to see the body count. You're there to see the unique deaths. And really, you could argue slashers have been dead for a long time, and now we're getting more realistic. And I feel like sometimes you have gore over plot still, and we've been seeing that for the past 40 years, you know, of 50 years of horror movies at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things have been done. I'm not going to say everything's been done, but I'm saying a lot of things have been done, and a lot of things have been done to death, right? Yeah. I mean, there's been so many spin-offs and so many terrible, terrible B versions of everything that, yeah, it's been overdone. So again, it's one direction that you can go is to make these things, you know, gore fests, right? I mean, that's one way to go. That's, you know, there's definitely an audience for that. And you're not going to go wrong there, but yeah, whether they need to go there, I don't know.
Right. You know, I just want to briefly discuss, we've discussed, you know, First Love and stuff like that, you know, genre mixes, we have black comedies, we have sci-fi horror, you know, I know, like, so you're a big sci-fi fan. When it comes to genre mixes, do you like your horror to be more just like straight up horror, or do you prefer the genre mixes that we have?
My very favorites are always mixes, but that's me. Just because I'm a big sci-fi fan. So of course, if horror movies have elements of sci-fi in it, I'm gonna gravitate towards them. Now, again, like we mentioned before, there's a lot of bad ones in space, and I don't like those better than the other ones simply because they have sci-fi elements. Not at all. I'm just saying when they're done well, done correctly, I usually gravitate more towards those.
Now, what about black comedies, though?
Now, again, the horror comedy world, if it's done right, it can be done well. Like you have, Evil Dead 2, RB Darkness. Those are examples of it being done well, right?
Right.
I mean, there's, elements of like Fright Night, right? Like that's, it's got a lot of comedy in it too. And it's done well. It's good. Now, when it's done bad is when it's self-aware, and I'm not saying because it's self-aware it means it's bad, not necessarily. I'm just saying most of these, bad B movies, they try to be self-aware and they try to make it a joke that they're self-aware, and they try to make it as stupid and cheesy as possible to try to get those laughs, right?
Right.
And I just think more often than not, I would say 90%, maybe even higher than that, of the movies I've seen that try to do that fail.
Yes.
Miserably. Very, very badly. To the point where, again, if you look at that percentage, over 90% of those movies are bad. So when I see a movie that's intentionally trying to be funny, trying to be self-aware, I usually just stay away from it. Does that mean it's bad? No, but there's a good chance, a very high chance that it will be.
Well, I mean, there's some elements in horror movies that have been going on for decades now that, they use a little comedic effect to ease the tension, to put you into a false sense of security, right? And that's okay. But you have other movies, I'd say since like past 7 to 10 years, I don't think there's any comedic things in, Hereditary or Midsummer or anything like that I think there's a lot more movies coming out now that there's just straight horror and tension without the comedy, just to lighten and that you're just in for the ride the entire long haul.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely two approaches to that. One is like you try to be very, very serious, and again, that can be done wrong too. I'm not saying it's only one way they can be done wrong. It can be done wrong that way too. Is where they take themselves too seriously. You have like a bad B movie with like a ridiculously cheesy, bad looking monster, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to sell it as super serious. Yeah, of course it's going to come off as bad. It's going to come off as ridiculous. Like, of course, nobody's going to believe you. Nobody's going to take you seriously. Even though you're trying to be serious, nobody's going to take it seriously because it can't be there. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of times, especially with B-level stuff, you have to try to find that balance, right? You have to try to get a little bit of both. And there's movies that have both that do well. I mean, like, you look at, like, Cabin in the Woods, right?
Yep.
They have a lot of comedic elements in there, and it does it well, but it evens it out, right? I mean, there's both.
Yeah.
And I think it does that well. It just, again, it's a hard medium to find. It's very easy to tip one way or the other too much and do it badly. And I think more often than not, if you try to put too much comedic elements in it, they fail.
Do you think it works better when you have someone who writes comedy that tries to write horror, or someone that writes horror try to write comedy?
I don't know. I personally would probably think the person who writes comedy when they make horror would probably do it better.
Right.
Because at least they got the comedic stuff down, right? They know that timing. They know, when the jokes are coming, right? They understand that stuff, but they're going to try to even it out with the horror stuff. Now, the horror guy is going to try to take his horror seriously, right?
Yep.
He's going to try to take that too serious, and he's going to try to add jokes in there. But because he doesn't necessarily know the timing or how the jokes work, I think they're going to come off a lot worse. So I think the comedy guy writing horror is going to be better off than the horror guy writing comedy.
I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. That if you can't do the comedy, honestly, don't put it in there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Yeah. Go for this. Do tension. You don't have to lighten the mood. All right.
Yeah.
You want to take over the next part of our?
Sure. At this point, we're just going to kind of go over some remakes and reboots, and we're just going to kind of Put them in broad categories, whether they're going to be good, and that is either they're better or at least on the same level as the original that they remade, or we're going to go bad, and that means they're going to be worse than the original. Okay, so if they're at the same level, they're going to be in the good category. If they're under that, they're going to be in the bad category. And then we have a questionable category, which I know that we'll have some little bit of discussion on, simply because it could be one way, it could be the other way. We'll kind of have some discussion, but the good and the bad, for the most part, we agree on it.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll just start off with the good, and we will go with the 1990 version of Night of the Living Dead.
So I consider it a remake because it's almost just like colorized version of Night of the Living Dead. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it is the same. I mean, they go into a little bit more, but I mean, the budget that Romero had for the first one was nothing, right? I mean, that's why they had to just film it in a house with like no other outside influence, because they had no money to do anything else. So I mean, it gives you more. You get to see the people like hunting the zombies, and you get to see like how goofy and hillbilly-ish that they got, right? They had like zombie wrestling and goofy stuff like that. But you also get to see outside a little more, right? I mean, like the house ends up a little bit differently. I mean, obviously in the original, Ben was the only one who survived, and then he got killed because they thought he was a zombie at the end, so that everybody ends up dead.
Right.
Sorry, spoilers for a 60-year-old movie, right? But then this one is like, when Ben gets killed, I think the old husband survives in the attic, I think, right?
Yeah.
And then he ends up in the Ben thing where he gets killed by the guys coming in, but the woman survives.
Yep.
Barbara survives. Like, she actually gets away. Like, she actually goes and like escapes into the countryside, and she finds these guys, and I believe she's the one that leads them to the house. And then I think, isn't she the one who tells him, "Oh yeah, he's a zombie, kill him"? I think it is.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while for this one, but it was again at least at the same level. Obviously, the original Night of the Living Dead is
a classic.
Is a fantastic movie. You love the movie, but this one it's more or less the same story up until it branches a little bit. But I don't think it takes away from it. I think it adds a little something just to give you a little different viewpoint on how the story could have gone. And I think it did a good job of it. I liked it.
I agree.
And we'll do The Mummy. Now there's going to be another Mummy further down the list here. This is specifically the 1999 Mummy with Brendan Fraser. And again, I mean, a fantastic movie. I mean, it's I think it's better than the original. I don't know about all the other Hammer horror versions that you know about that I've never watched. I'm pretty sure it's better than all those, though.
I mean, the Boris Karloff Mummy is a classic. I think it's a classic for a reason. I think this is I think it's good on par for different reasons. Like, don't get me wrong. I mean, I named one of my kids after Evie, straight up from this movie because of this movie, right? Yeah. So I like it, obviously enough to do that. No, I mean, it was, we discussed in the list of stuff. I think it was more action packed, but it was a good turn for it, and the sequel was pretty good. And let's not discuss the third one.
Yeah, past that, we just won't talk.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely on par, just in a different way. It wasn't focused on the Mummy necessarily.
It had a lot more, a lot more like action adventure kind of Indiana Jonesy stuff in there. But I think it adds a little element of fun to it. But yeah, I think it outshines the original.
Yeah.
And then next we'll go The Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah. I saw this in theaters. I know that. I saw it.
I don't think I saw this one in theaters. I'm pretty sure I did not.
Which I feel like you love the original. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the original is, I like all those Hill folk horror stories. I love those stories.
Right.
I mean, because to me, they're very terrifying.
Right,
Those
the
are
Appalachian
very scary.
mountain
I'd
men.
say yes. I mean, like right under giant bugs is Hillfolk, is things that I'm terrified of. So yeah, so those are always good for me. So the original, I liked, and this one was also good. I mean, it was a little bit different. I mean, I think the first one was a little bit more, had a little bit more of a psychological aspect to it.
Yeah.
You know, again, it was just a little bit more suspenseful. I thought it was a little bit more, I don't know, horror.
It was definitely like the wife can watch the original Hill Has Eyes. Like I don't think she's watched The Hill Have Eyes after we saw it in theaters, 15, 16 years ago, because it's so, it was, as she calls it, gruesome, right? That you have Pyro get his part of his hand chopped off, right? But you were rooting for him. You wanted him to win. I felt like that was more there in the remake, that there's more of like a triumphant rooting for him than he was getting damaged. You're going to in that such situation, right? You're not going to come out of it unscathed.
Right. And they really had that like mutation aspect of it.
Right. More so. More so.
Yeah, the original one, I think they really wanted to do that. I just they didn't have the budget for that. So they just kind of picked people that looked weird.
Right.
They didn't really have a whole lot of prosthetics or makeup. This got like people that looked odd and different. And weird.
That guy has a unique look for him, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely does.
Really, he seemed like a really nice guy. Really smart.
Yeah, right. I mean, cool guy. I mean, like in Weird Science, he seemed like the when he calmed down. I think that was like his normal self, and I think it was a cool guy. But yeah, they just got people that looked weird. So I think the remake, they really had the budget to like make them look as mutated and weird as they wanted to, and I think that adds a little something special to it. I think, like I said, it's a little bit dumbed down. They dumbed down the story elements, and they kind of up the the gore and
right.
Slasher factor.
The Hill folks seem more like a Wrong Turn or the episode of X-Files, with mom under the bed, right?
Right.
So I think that became the new standard of Hill folk in horror movies, is that mutated look.
Yeah.
Or the inbred look, if you will, for some of these things, right?
Yeah. But slightly different than the original. I mean, obviously it's more or less a very similar story, but different from the original in a slightly different direction, but at least on the same level as the original, I would say. Okay, and then we'll move on to Suspiria, which is the remake of the original Dario Argento, who most say it's his best movie.
Yes.
Famed Italian director. Now, Suspiria, I like the original one, and it's kind of interesting because Dakota Johnson is the main character in it, and she gets kind of a real bad rap for the whole 50 Shades fiasco, because she was in all those movies, and I think most people just assume she's a terrible actress because she was in those movies, and she's a fantastic actress in just about everything else she's been in other than those movies, which of course she didn't want to be in either, but you can't turn down that kind of money.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, she was fantastic in this movie, and the whole thing was extremely good.
Oh, visually.
Who was the
visually?
Who was the dance instructor? Tilda Swinton was in it. Yeah, I mean, but visually, I mean, acoustically, it was beautifully shot movie, and a very well done.
I didn't think they were going to be able to come close to the original. And I was pleasantly surprised with this movie.
Yeah, they did great. I mean, obviously, there's they're both have their place. I mean, the original Argento version is definitely not, I would say, outshined, but they're both great, just in slightly different directions.
Agreed.
And then we'll go Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Which one?
1978.
With Donald Sutherland, Jeff Goldblum.
Yes. That's the good one.
Right. I mean, how many of these we had now? Because we had Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1993, and then we had Invasion with Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig. We have the TV show now.
Yeah.
I mean, visually, it's almost a colorized version of the original. We had the original guy from the 1968, 63. He was the crazy guy in the street in the 1978 one. So they had a good little cameo in there from him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely the first Jeff Goldblum movie I saw. It was not one of his, if not one of his first.
I mean, I didn't see this is. I mean, this is the one chronologically that he did first that I've seen. But obviously, I think I saw. I'm pretty sure I saw The Fly.
Okay,
which is also it's a little further down.
But definitely a good, upbringing. I think it's the ingrained into, or as we discussed, ingrained in society, that this version is really what made it for a lot of ingrained. Most people think of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, they think of scenes from this movie.
Right. And the next on the list, we're still on the good list. Yep. The next on this list is The Crazies, the 2010 remake of the Romero classic.
Love this movie. I love both versions of this movie.
Yeah, both versions are very good. I mean, they're both, different in their own ways, but again, they're both different. Again, this one does kind of the same thing that Hills Have Eyes does. Is it not necessarily dumbs down, because the plot there wasn't a whole lot there to begin with, but it just kind of ups the gore and kind of goes a little bit lighter on the story and plot. But it does it in a good way. It does it.
It modernizes it, I feel, pretty well, to the point where it doesn't necessarily overshadow, but it's really on par with it. And the Contagion, set this 10 years later from this one. I mean, it still hold its spot, right? If we made it in 2021, 2022, it might be even more interesting if we did it now. COVID, all that stuff, right?
Yeah. I think people are a little bit more cognizant of disease and what it can do to people now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, love both movies no end.
Agreed. And the next one on the list is The Invisible Man, the 2020 version.
Oh man, this had no right being as good as it was. I didn't think it was going to be. We discussed the failed Dark Universe. I had low expectations for this. I mean, it looked good, and it delivered. It really delivered.
It really did. And now that I think about it, now that I'm looking at it, this would also fit into the horror turning sci-fi story.
Absolutely.
As well. Right.
Yeah.
Because, at first you just think she's going crazy or something, right? There's no possible way that this dude is following her around and because she, keeps thinking that he's there when he's not. And then you don't find out until later on that he's a scientist, that knows how to bend light and all this goofy, crazy stuff. Right. And you figure out that he actually has a suit that makes him invisible. And then you don't find that out until later.
Right. But
yeah, no, I think it would fit in.
I mean, like I said, the original classic, but we're looking at something almost 75 years later and did it better.
Yep.
It really I'm excited for more Blumhouse dark, classic Universal Monsters creations as they're coming out. It made me hopeful for this genre to come back.
Yeah, definitely. I know we discussed, possibly moving this into another shared universe. I really hope they do, but yeah, if this is the first step in that direction, I'm on.
Yeah.
And next we'll go for 13 Ghosts with the 1 and the 3 in 2001.
Man, this is, I think, the second entry into the Dark Castle Productions world, and this movie, along with something a couple movies down on this list, for me, it's impeccable. It's the ghosts were very reminiscent of Cenobites to me in this one.
Yeah, again, and it's what really sells this movie is, of course, the visuals. The 13 ghosts they all have their own very unique, right? They all have their own kind of look and, their own kind of story. And, they're all trapped in those glass walls of the house, and everything is shifting and moving. And it's a very visually, just good looking movie. I mean, obviously, which is a one up from the original.
Yeah, original was it Vincent Price, 60s?
Yeah, right. And again, it does what most of these newer remakes on this list are doing, where it kind of like goes a little bit lighter on the story, not bad, to the point where you don't know what's going on, but it ups that visual aspect of it, right? Because of course, at this point, we have a lot better effects than they did back in the 60s and 70s and even 80s at that point, to where you can really make things look interesting. And what's cool about this is they did it. I mean, obviously there's a lot of digital stuff there, but they did enough of it and with practical effects to where it still looks pretty good today.
And the ghost with the saw blades coming out of him was one of the creatures in Cabin in the Woods in one of those cells.
Nice.
I was excited when I saw that. I'm like, oh man! But surprising, a lot of people rag him in this movie. I feel
really.
It just didn't like the lawyer Alexia, from Buffy. They didn't like him in it. They didn't like Shannon Elizabeth in it. Tony Shalhoub. They hated Matthew Lillard in it. I thought it was just a really well put together movie.
Yeah, and I think those people being in it kind of grounded it a little bit. Like I said, brought the plot down a little bit. From the old one, but again, they were heavy on that stuff back then because they had to be.
Right.
They did, the visuals were nothing to be that were going to wow people with.
Right.
It. But yeah, no, I think they did a good job with that. I liked it.
Yeah.
And next on the list is The Blob, which came out in 1988. Now, when I first saw this as a kid, I remember this is one of the first horror movies I can remember watching as a kid. Like me going and renting and being excited to watch was The Blob, like right when it first came out. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. But I didn't see the original one until years later. And I was very disappointed when I watched the original one, but that was just because, I watched this one, when I was 10.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously you go back then and you can tell it's freaking Jell-O, or you can tell it's, whatever, like peanut butter being squished through it. You know what? I mean, it doesn't look scary at all. And the acting is kind of goofy.
Steve McQueen, the 35-year-old teenager. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the original is not all that stellar. I mean, obviously it was, good enough to, be one of the classic horror movies to be remade. But I would say overall, this Blob is better than the original.
And I recall reading or hearing that this was one of the first horror movies that killed a kid, like showed the death of a kid when they're like in the sewer with it. The little boy that got killed, like melted in it. That was like
everybody got killed.
Yeah, I mean that was a big thing that happened in this movie. And I'm honestly surprised this hasn't been remade since then.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's still good. I mean, it holds up pretty well. I mean, the effects are not great, but I mean, the story itself holds up
better than the stuff.
Well, yeah, that's correct. That is correct. And next we'll have Dawn of the Dead in 2004 version. Now this one is good. I mean, obviously it goes in a lot different direction from the original one. I mean, they still share that they're living in a mall, right? I mean, they have that. But I mean, the original Dawn of the Dead is what? There's 3 characters, right? There's 2 guys and a girl, and then this version of Dawn of the Dead, there's a whole bunch of people. I mean, there's like, I don't know, 10, 12 people.
Yeah.
I mean, there's quite a few of them. And so there's a lot of like sub stories being told. There's a lot of like back and forth. I mean, you got the guy that's like across the street that they're communicating with
chalkboard,
with chalkboard. I mean, there's so many more interesting things going on. The original Dawn of the Dead is great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's one of my very favorite zombie movies. I mean, it's got goofy effects. I always just think of the guy that gets his head chopped by the helicopter. And how ridiculously large his head was before that point. Also, my other favorite one is when in the very beginning of the movie, when the guy kicks down the door and the guy's standing there and he just shoots him in the face with his shotgun. And it's obviously just a watermelon exploding. I mean, it looks nothing like a human head. It's a watermelon, and it's very funny. But I mean, overall, it's still a good movie. The story is great, but this one, it goes in a slightly different direction. I mean, it has a lot of the same elements, but it goes in a totally different direction. Obviously, the ending is way different.
Right.
Instead of fighting the biker gang, they end up like building like a death bus and trying to like escape and stuff, and it goes in a totally different direction. I mean, obviously there's enough similarities to where it can be that, and I guess it really just does stand well on its own. I think it's just a good movie on its own. I think they're both great, and I think they both have their place, and I think this one is on even ground. It's definitely
I mean, this was the kickstart of the new of the Dead that line that we got, right? Do you feel like they missed the mark of not doing Night of the Living Dead first?
I don't know. I mean, the hard part is like, if they redid it again, is like they're going to have flashbacks to when they lost the copyright the first time. I don't know. I think they just wanted to kind of move on from that. I think they just wanted to do something else. But yeah, I don't think Romero he wasn't directly involved in Dawn of the Dead, was he? This new one?
Yeah. For sure.
I know you like executive produced
I'm pretty sure it's still George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And then it's George A. Romero's Land of the Dead. And they did.
Well, yeah, I know after this, I know that he was back on the Of the Dead train.
Okay.
And I know he did all the rest of them after that. It's just this one, I don't know if he actually directed.
I'll have to look it up.
The other ones.
That's a good question.
I don't know.
It's still good though. I saw this in theaters too.
Look it up later. No, I don't think I think Dawn of the Dead. Because basically, if it's after like 2008, I saw it in the theater because I saw basically everything in the theater for a while there. But if it's before 2008, it's a good chance I probably didn't see it unless it was like a movie that I would really be into, which was almost all sci-fi stuff.
Right.
Okay. So moving on, we got House on Haunted Hill, 1999.
Oh man. Wasn't old enough to go see this one in theaters. Because I have very, very strict parents. If I was under 17, not allowed to go see it. However, as we discussed before, Jeffrey Rush, amazing Vincent Price. I mean, I love the original House on Haunted Hill. I think it's a great story, and it was not supernatural in any way, just aspect of it, but this went pure supernatural at the end. Right. I mean, It was, I thought it was an amazing movie. It was one of my favorite movies. I mean,
yeah. And he also pulls off that creepy Vincent Price pencil mustache, like that weird John Waters mustache. Yeah. He pulls it off fairly well. And I think that's what the big part of selling him as Vincent Price, I think, is that mustache.
And like I said, it's the first thing I recall seeing from the Dark Castle Productions that really put on the map from like, you know what? Yeah, I they can keep doing this. I'm going to stick with them.
Well, move on to your favorite franchise, and this is the Evil Dead in 2013, which is not necessarily, well, I guess it's a right.
No.
I mean,
it's in my eyes, in Fede Alvarez's eyes, it is a sequel because it's not even the same characters. Yes, it's the same cabin, but that's the only similarities that it is.
It has the same name. That's a pretty big similarity.
Right, but because of Bruce Campbell's cameo as Ash at the end, and the failed plans that came from it was just another story in the universe, which we're going to get with Evil Dead Rise is just another story in that universe, and because of that, I'm lumping it into a more of a reboot than a remake for me personally. We got a different character, and Mia was supposed to be the next Ash with her hand being not even chopped off but like slid off from the car. Right. I mean, this really increased the gore factor to the point where the wife would not watch this. She has not watched this because at all. Because especially in the previews with her taking that razor blade and like slicing her tongue in half, it was too much for her. I thought it was a fantastic movie. I did not get to go see this in theaters. I'm very disappointed I didn't get to.
I did. Again, it's after 2008. It's after 2008. I probably saw it in the theater. So yes, I did see this in the theater, and it was great. Yes.
My wife was very pregnant when this came out, so she wasn't going to go see it at all. So I was going to have to find someone, or I was going to go see it by myself, but I was not able to. So unfortunately, I didn't. And I'm hoping Evil Dead Rise gets in theaters, that we'll do the Evil Dead franchise more when we get to that movie. Evil Dead Rises.
Yes. Okay, and so next we'll do The Thing, the 1982 version of The Thing, which is almost every list that ever comes up with reboots, remakes. It's always number one. Which is, I mean, obviously this far outshines the original. I mean, the original is more of your kind of classic, monster of the week kind of thing, right? Yeah, I mean, it's a very generic, basic movie, and this just, I mean, blows it away. I mean, it just adds so many new elements and so much, I mean, just, masterclass in filmmaking,
right?
that it took to make this movie. It's, head and shoulders above the original.
Well, you were here 40 years later, and people are still discussing the ending of what it means, their take on it, and that was just, it was, I wouldn't call it good. I'd call it a bad ending, just because it's bad. Bad is not, you don't know. Good doesn't win necessarily. Yeah. You don't know.
What's the best version of that ending? They're both human, which means they freeze to death. I mean, that's the best version of that ending, right? And then any of the other endings is variations on who is the thing, right? So it gets worse, obviously, because they could potentially survive and then infect the rest of humanity if they don't freeze to death first. But the best version of that is they're both human and they slowly freeze to death. So yes, it's a bad ending no matter how you look.
I mean, 40 years later, we're still discussing who was the thing, if any of them. And that was,
but yes, I love bad endings, and that's
far superior to the thing from another world.
Yes, I think everybody agrees with that one. But yes, next on the list will be the one we mentioned a little bit earlier. Will be The Fly, the 1986 version of The Fly, done by David Cronenberg, starring Jeff Goldblum
and Gina Davis.
Yes, of course, Gina Davis.
In my head, and we're going to discuss Cronenberg movies at some point in the list, this is the most cohesive Cronenberg movie.
I mean, it can. I mean, sure. I'll give you that. But it's, I mean, he's not as bad as some other filmmakers who shall remain nameless. But I mean, he does have a little bit of ambiguity in his work. I won't deny that. But I like that. I think that's interesting. But
the entirety of it, you really felt like Jeff Goldblum's character was turning into the Fly,
right? Yeah, they do a great job showing that evolution and that kind of weird, like, desperate level that he was at of trying to, fix himself and then embracing what he was and then ultimately giving up, right?
No, I mean, he turns into a giant insect. How do you don't like that? So, are you okay with that at the end?
Yeah. I mean, again, getting to the point where, you understand that everything you thought was going well is now terrible, and you need to end it. I mean, I think it's good. It sucks that Gina Davis had to do that because he was unable to do it himself. I think that sucks.
Right.
But I think that was ultimately a big show of love on her part to do that for him.
Right.
So I think, I mean, ultimately, it's basically a bad ending, right? I mean, there's nothing really good about that, which is why I probably like it.
And we won't discuss the sequel to this either.
No. But I mean, very, very interesting. But again, way better than the original.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that's the end of the good list. Now we get to go into the bad list, and these are all ones that we, or at least I, am considering worse than the original. And we will start it off with Pet Sematary, the 2019 version. Now, I really wanted to like this movie. I mean, John Lithgow was in it, right? I
Oh
love John
yeah.
Lithgow. I was really had high hopes for this movie, and man, it was bad. It just hurt to watch. I mean, it was one of those movies that I was just, I was doing something else by the time the movie was over. Like I didn't want it to be around anymore. I wanted it to end. Yeah, just terribly.
I mean, yeah, John Lithgow, the guy who played John Connor in which Terminator with Amelia Clark.
Oh yeah,
Genesis.
Genesis, yeah, Genesis,
awesome.
sure.
I mean, we call it a remake because it's just the source material. I don't know if it's necessarily rebooting or remaking the 1988 one, but like, okay, we can all agree that Gage was awful in the 1981 one, and they didn't
awful meaning scary, terrible.
Oh, I mean that too, but that as a kid actor, he was like 3. You know, can't expect it. But it's just weird that they changed the plot of which kid get hit by the truck, right? Like that's a weird thing to change.
I think they were just trying to. I mean, I think that part of it they were just trying to shake it up a little, so you didn't quite expect that, right?
But I mean, and then if you want to go off the 1988 one. It's left very ambiguous. You don't know, especially with the actual director's cut, right? What happens at the end? They just took it like extra 10 minutes after that scene, which was weird. That he gets killed and he gets buried, and then they go after so it's the wife, him, and the daughter going after the son, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I mean, what was is just so disinteresting for you?
Yeah, it was just it's just one of those movies that you're watching it, and it's just not done well to the point where if I'm thinking about doing something else, like if I'm thinking, oh, I should look this up on the internet while I'm watching a movie, it's a bad movie. I mean, that's just the way it is. I'm not intentionally trying to get away from it. It just my brain is trying to shut it down. It's like, okay, this is terrible. You don't need to watch this anymore.
Agreed.
So that's by the end of it, I wasn't even paying that much of attention. I think I was dozing off by the end of this, which I never do. I never sleep during a movie unless it's horror.
Yeah.
But yeah, both agree. Terrible movie. Next on the list will be the much maligned A Nightmare on Elm Street, the new version done in 2010 with our friend Jackie Earle Haley as Freddy Krueger.
We can get into this a lot more when we talk about the franchise.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this movie, it doesn't. I mean, yeah, again, we'll get into this more, but yeah, it gets into stuff that doesn't necessarily need to get into. It twists hard on the whole, molesting kids angle, which again wasn't really. I mean, it was kind of insinuated, but not discussed in the originals. Right. But again, it brought it to a weird place. I mean, I can't describe how odd it is that like the two characters find the weird room that they were molested in as children, and then like decide that that's the time to get it on. Like, I don't understand that. Like, I mean, what person's mind would go there, especially with somebody like chasing you, like some person is potentially trying to kill you, murder you. I don't get it. I mean, this whole movie does it. I mean, it upsets a lot of, horror purist people, obviously, because it focuses on things that weren't even discussed. Again, fair to be insinuated in the original, but weren't discussed in the original.
Yeah,
it basically focused hard on that. I mean, that was basically what the movie was about.
And it did so well. We got how many sequels from it? Oh, right, none.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it shut
it
down.
Bring it back, and then just go.
And I was, yeah, I was excited for it because this was like right after Watchmen.
Yeah.
Right. And Jackie Earle Haley, I was like, he did such a fantastic job in The Watchmen. I was like, oh, he's going to be, I think his career is going to be going in a really cool direction now. And that's where he's going to go. I had high hopes that he was going to pull it off. And I think he did a passable job. I just think it was the overall story that they put in it. I mean, obviously that, I mean, Robert Englund wasn't involved. I mean, he's still around. He's still acting. Obviously, still willing to do Freddy Krueger. I don't know why he wasn't involved.
It's hard shoes to fill, which was already had going against him, and then just the choices in the movie that were made for it.
Yeah, and again, I don't think he did that bad of a job. I don't think he outshined, Robert Englund. I don't think, I don't think he did that. I don't think he did too bad of a job, though. I think it was just the elements that the movie focused on was just totally odd considering where it came from, and that I just don't think it was a faithful representation of it.
Agreed.
So, overall, just bad.
Agreed.
And next on the list, I have the 2015 version of Poltergeist, which I will be honest and say I didn't even know there was a 2015 version.
I saw it in tears.
I'm sorry to hear that. But I did not see it. I did not even know it existed. But I've heard it's very, very bad. I'll let you discuss.
I mean, the original is so iconic, right? And it's just because it's stuff we grew with now. I didn't see the first 3 in theaters, but I had really high hopes, and it was an okay adaptation. I don't think it was a necessary movie to necessarily be made. It just didn't bring anything new or different or exciting. Pretty generic movie for a Poltergeist movie, quite honestly. I couldn't tell you where they could have done any better. It almost seemed like it's just a complete retelling, just worse.
But again, Poltergeist is one of those movies that everybody knows, right? I mean, the original is a classic. It's still a classic. It's not like people don't know about it. I mean, people still know about it a lot. It's still discussed in like every horror circle. So I don't understand why you think it would be made. I mean, I guess that could go for a lot of things.
I would argue that just kind of like Nightmare on Elm Street, it didn't have to be a retelling or a remake. It could have been obviously the girl that played Caroline is dead, but it could have been just the same house but different people. It didn't have to be the same story, which we see on a lot of
it could have,
right?
Yeah, it could have easily been. Yeah, it could have easily been another story told in the same world. But yeah,
explore the universe.
It's fair. And then next on the list, we'll go the 1998 Vince Vaughn Psycho, which I honestly, I don't know why this exists. No one can really understand why this movie exists. Everybody thought he was going to, redo it, kind of put a modern spin on it, remake it. I mean, so many movies have been remade, right? And it was essentially just a shot for shot remake. I mean, that's literally all it was. I mean, there was nothing added. It was the exact same movie, just done with modern, people and equipment. That's it. Nobody quite understood why it came out. No one got it. From what I understand, it's technically good. I mean, I'm not saying good as in a good film, good as in made well. But again, pointless. Why are you retelling the same story? Everybody knows Psycho. Psycho's a very classic movie. It's a Hitchcock movie. Everybody knows.
Well, maybe they were losing the rights because we had Psycho 1960. We had Psycho 2 1983 or something like that. And there's only a few years before this that Psycho 4 came out. So it almost made more sense to bin number 5.
From what I understand, it was Vince Vaughn's baby.
Yeah.
That was the thing he wanted to do since he got into filmmaking.
Right.
And again, that's why everybody was excited that he was going to do something fresh and new and interesting, because Vince Vaughn was pretty big at that time. And they're essentially that just killed his career, because it was he just remade the original movie. He didn't do anything else. There's nothing fresh here. Very few excuses. Obviously he's still acting, but I was saying as far as being seen as a serious actor or a serious filmmaker, I think this kind of killed that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. The next on the list we have the living meme that is the Wicker Man in 2006. Now this movie is, I mean, if you just watch like the last 20 minutes of the movie, it is like a straight wacky kind
Oh yeah.
I mean, it is like, who knows what's going on? I mean, Nicolas Cage is in like a bear suit, like punching old ladies and stuff. I mean, it's like, what is going on? And then he's screaming about the bees. I mean, it's so bad, it's good. But that's only if you watch the first 20 minutes of it. The problem is you have to get through like the over hour before that point, which is just like boring. I mean, there's like nothing going on. It's so pointless.
So, saw this in theaters.
Oh, I did not know. See, this is before 2008. I did not see this.
I did not finish it in the theater.
Wow, you actually left?
So
you missed the good parts?
Okay, so either the wife, then girlfriend, was that disinterested in it, or she was sick. I don't remember which one, but I know I did not finish it in the theater. It's one of the few movies I saw that I've been to the theater that just, I like, we walked out. I don't think it was not my choosing. I want to see how it ended because I paid for it.
Right.
It doesn't hold a candle to The Wicker Tree. Right? Because that's what's remaking The Wicker Tree.
Yeah, I didn't watch the original. I've just seen this one. And I don't, you don't have to watch the original to know this one is bad. It's just a bad movie.
Yeah.
It is terrible. Like I said, the last part of it is only goofy out of context. If you like actually know what's happening in the movie, it's not all that funny. But if you watch it out of context, it is genuine.
Oh, absolutely. Really, really downplays the whole island aspect, foreign visitor to island cult. Right.
Right.
Which is a trope now.
Yeah. Okay. Next on the list will be the 2005 version of The Fog. Which I don't know why this was made. I don't understand. Like, The Fog, is a classic John Carpenter movie. I guess it's not one of his bigger movies, but I mean, it's still a John Carpenter movie.
Oh yeah.
Right? So like, as to why this got remade, I don't know. It wasn't good. I could
less fog, so you're able to see more. It was less foggy because it was artificial fog, so therefore they're able to control it a little bit more.
Right.
Saw this in theaters.
Yeah, I did. Again, it's before 2008. I did not.
I see a lot of horror movies in theaters, in case you can't tell. Especially early.
If it's after 2008, I might be on par with you, but before then, nope.
Yeah, no reason for it. It was a remake, unnecessarily remake. Wasn't even adding to the story. Just go watch the Tom Atkins and Jamie Lee Curtis one instead.
Yeah, the original one is a great movie. It's John Carpenter made it fantastic. I don't even know why this exists. But yeah, it's a failure. That's why it's on the bad list.
Yes.
Next on the list, we'll have the 2019 version of Child's Play. I know this one's your favorite.
It almost makes me regret having Chucky on my tattoo sleeve. It's that bad. I mean, obviously it did horrible because, well, we now have Chucky the TV show, which is season 2 is coming out in a couple of weeks. And it's the only thing that deals with Child's Play or Chucky that Don Mancini was not part of. And it shows. Like, he's done everything except for this one since the original Child's Play. I understand they're trying to modernize it with it just AI gone bad, which clearly is not the essence of Child's Play.
Yeah, but again, I don't understand why, like, this is like Chucky, the story was still going. I mean, at that point, they had made a movie in a couple years, but I mean, they'd made one in that decade. Right?
No, they made one the year before.
Yeah. So I mean, again, like, if it's still going, if they're still making those movies, obviously they're doing, well enough, right? So why would you reboot it? When the original timeline is still going. I don't understand it. If it's a dead franchise, I get that.
Right.
But like, it's not. It's still going. I don't understand why you whatever. I don't get it. It's bad.
They were going to have separate things. They were going to have the original timeline, and they were going to have this. Their idea was two separate things. Well, that's not the case anymore. So.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're going to do that, why steal the original name? If you want to do a different thing, then do a different thing. Name it something different.
Yeah,
I don't get it. I mean, I know you're trying to steal fandom from that name. You're trying to get people to get name recognition to work for you. I get that, but if you're not going to stay true to the original, what's the point?
I mean, Mark Hamill did a good job with it. I mean, he's no Brad Dourif. I mean, he's also a voice actor, but Brad Dourif's voice is so iconic; it's hard to choose to fill. And I understand not getting Brad Dourif involved, so you want to have it your own separate thing. But yeah, to reboot a franchise when it's in the middle of an existing franchise, 0 sense.
Right. Yeah. Don't get it.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then we'll move on to Carrie. Now I'm going to put in both the 2002 and 2013 versions in here. I know the 2002 version, I believe, was like, wasn't it like it was a made for TV movie or something?
Yes.
But I remember it coming out on video as if it was like a straight to video movie. I don't think I realized it was a television movie at that time.
It was around the same time frame as the Shining TV series, and then we got the Storm of the Century series from Stephen King. This just kind of went into that line of Stephen King TV miniseries that we're getting remakes of at that point.
Okay, I get that.
For a reason.
Yeah, but yeah, I rented it from I think, because in 2002, I'm pretty sure I was still going to the video store. So I'm pretty sure I rented it from the video store, assuming that it was just a new Carrie movie. I didn't know it was made for TV anyway, and it was not great. And then this 2013 version
Chloe
was again
Moretz, right?
Chloe Grace
yeah.
Moretz, whatever her name. Yeah. And that was not good either. I think I know the reason why she took the role. I believe she took the role to try to like age herself as an actress. You know what I mean? I think she was trying to get out of that like kid realm that she had been in previous to this, and I'm pretty sure that she was trying to use this to try to move forward as like a woman instead of a girl. And I get that, but it's still just a bad movie. It still doesn't hold a candle to the original Sissy Spacek.
Goodness no.
I mean, it was done great the first time. I don't think it needs to be improved on. They've tried twice. They failed twice.
Even with Carrie 2, the rage.
So just let it go. I mean, at least it had the original people in it. I mean, that's all I can say about that. But I mean, yeah, the original Carrie was done great. I don't know why they're trying to remake it, but they are, and they failed. So they're both on this list. And then at the end of this bad list, we're gonna have The Mummy, the 2017 Tom Cruise version of The Mummy.
Yeah, we briefly discussed this on the failed Dark Universe. I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, I know why they're trying to do it, but it's like the third attempt of the startup of the universe. And just Tom Cruise is not meant for the Dark Universe. He's too action oriented, and it was almost trying to be like a combination of the original and Brendan Fraser's.
Well, yeah, I think, and that's what they were trying to do is they couldn't. I think they couldn't ignore the Brendan Fraser version because it's so iconic at that point, right? I mean, when people hear The Mummy, that's what they think of. I mean, I'd say modern audiences probably don't even think of the old Boris Karloff version anymore, right?
Except that's the one we know. That's ingrained into our.
Well, that's the classic. Yeah, if you know classic horror, yes, then you know. But I would say most people when they think of The Mummy are going to think of the Brendan Fraser version.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's terrible. I mean, there was the whole funny trailer thing. I don't think it ever really lived that down.
No.
And it wasn't good enough to outshine the joke. So yeah, it just failed miserably. I mean, I didn't even watch it, and I don't need to watch it.
I watched it once, and I was twice too many times.
Yeah, I mean, again, I was like on the fence whether I should watch it or not, as like a learning how bad movies can be kind of thing, and I just decided against it, and I don't think
No, you did not miss anything.
Okay, So that wraps up our bad list. Now we're going to go into the questionable list, which may be debatable. For a lot of people, there's a debate here between Graveyard and I. There may be a debate here, and that's okay. But that's why they're in this questionable place. We're not going to call them good. We're not going to call them bad. We're just going to say that they're here. And the first one in that list would be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the 2003 version with Jessica Biel.
We're looking at 40. No, how many years? Texas Chainsaw was 1973, 72, 75, something like that. So,
we'll give it what?
Let's say close to 30 year anniversary, right?
Yeah.
Arlie Emery was great. That was about it.
Jessica Biel looked very good in her jeans, I will say that.
Yes, and it's something we discussed before is, the one before this was The Next Generation with Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, which partially killed the franchise at that point in 1994.
Yeah.
I don't, like I said, Arlie Emery was great as the sheriff, the dad, right? I thought he did a great job in the movie. It doesn't live up to it. As we discussed before, you don't really see, it's the illusion of the chainsaw, right? I feel when we got to like Texas Chainsaw 2 and 3 that we got more violent, we were more graphic in the depiction of the chainsaw. And because after this we had The Beginning, which we are then had a prequel to the movie that was remade with Arlie Emery again, and it was going to kick off. Seemingly, it was an attempt at a reboot of or revival, or you want to call it, a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right?
Mm-hmm.
I saw this in theaters.
2008, I did not.
I'm trying to think. That's the beginning. We have to go rewatch Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love the original a lot. I know you like number 2 a lot. I haven't watched it enough. But this isn't something I go back to. This isn't something I go back and rewatch. I would rather rewatch the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
And that's fair. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre it's a great movie. It's a fantastic movie. And I will say this movie probably doesn't live up to that, but I think it's close. It's technically, if by our categories, as we mentioned before, I said technically it would be in the bad category, but I don't think it's far down in that list. I think it would be more towards the top. And it's basically, the way I see it is it did the same thing that a lot of movies on this did list is they, kind of cut back a little bit on the story and just up the gore. And they I think they went into a little bit more of, of how gruesome the house was, how terrible they were treated just as meat and stuff like that, which all these things were insinuated and kind of mentioned. I guess insinuated in the first one. But there wasn't a whole lot of butchering with the chainsaw or serious gore or injuring in the original. And this one does have that. And I think, again, it just kind of pulls back on the plot a bit, but ups that gore. But it also, like I said, I think it adds just a little bit of kind of wackiness to it. That kind of, in the original series, didn't really come in hard until the second one. That's when you had a little bit of that wackiness to it. And I think, like I said, I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is probably my favorite one, just because of it has that goofiness to it. And I think it does it extremely well, where it doesn't come off as comic jokiness. It just comes off as these people are extremely weird, right? Just very odd people.
Yeah.
And I think they kind of tried to throw that in a little bit into this version of it, just a darker version. But again, I don't think it quite lives up to the original, but it does do enough for me. Was
this the beginning of Platinum Dune's Michael Bay's attempt at remaking all the slashers? I feel like this was. I know the next one on the list is. I know Nightmare on Elm Street was as well.
Yeah. We'll just jump right to the next one. The next one is Friday the 13th, the 2009 version. And I think both you and I are in agreement that this is a good movie. It's just a lot of the horror community seems to think it is not a good movie. I saw a lot of it on the worst remakes lists, which I thought was odd because again, I liked it. I've had discussions with you about it. You liked it, which was just weird to me that a lot of people thought it was bad. But I did see it on the list, which is again why it's. I
don't know if I'd even consider this a remake or reboot or just a sequel, quite honestly. Because if you wanted to call it a remake, you could say it summarizes Friday the 13th 1 through 4, right?
Well, I think that's what it is. I think this is the Cliff Notes version of the story for everybody trying to get into the franchise. I really think that's what this is. This is like, here's the story so far. Right. Now we can move on from here. Is really what I think it is. But it does it well. I think it's. Oh,
I don't disagree.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, you know that Pamela Voorhees is decapitated. You know that Jason wears a bag and he gets the hockey mask and then he quote dies. Right. That's 1 through 4. In a nutshell, it really is. It goes through, where it started, where he got the mask, and now he's an unstoppable killing machine.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I like it. When I rewatch these, because I rewatch these when Friday the 13th comes out, all of them at a time. That I look forward to. I'm like, all right, I have Jason Goes to Hell, which is not that great of a movie. Then I have to go sit through Jason X. And then I'm like, all right, now I can get back to what it was. I think this did justice to the Friday the 13th franchise. I think it was a solid entry into it, by far.
Yeah. Again, I thought it was good. But again, I saw a lot of lists put it on the bad, so I'm going to put it in this category just because it seems to fit there. Okay, and then the next one, I'm going to keep it short. The next one is the 2007 Rob Zombie's Halloween. Now, we've already discussed this previous to this. I'm going to keep it very short. One is it adds a lot of background and human elements to Michael Myers, which a lot of people, especially the horror purist community, does not like. I like it. I think it's good that there's, a human element and a backstory to it. I know that you do not, because it is not faithful to the original. And we'll expand on that in the future. But as for right now, that's why it's in this.
I have lots to say on this movie.
Yes, so do I. So we're going to leave it at that for now. Is that I give it thumbs up, you give it thumbs down, and that's where we're at. And then the next one on the list would be the 2016 version of the Blair Witch, which I don't even know if it would you technically even call this a remake, because really it's just kind of a
so it's rebooting the franchise. I'd call it a reboot.
Okay, all right,
or legacy, if you will, too, because what was her name? Wasn't Angela? Was it Angela in the first one? Heather. It's her brother looking for her.
Okay. Right.
So it's not a remake per se. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie, quite honestly.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I've liked all the Blair Witches. I know that the second one, the Book of Shadows, a lot of people talk a lot of bad stuff about, but I thought it was good. I mean, I don't know why everybody's all upset about it. Like, I thought it was an interesting, expansion on the original. It kind of lived in that world where the original was
right.
Real, right. Like that. I mean, we all know that was actors doing that stuff, but in their world, it was real, and it just kind of moved on from there. And it was, as if the movie came out, only it was real events, versus in our world, it came out as a fictional movie. But I mean, I thought it was interesting. I thought there was an interesting twist at the end. I mean, it was like, there's mystery and suspense of what the hell happened, the video of what happened at their campsite. And there's a lot of just fun elements, the whole house was under surveillance, and they were looking and watching all this weird stuff happen, and everybody was doing something weird, and they were all trying to figure out who was the weirdest, right? What is happening? I thought it was good. I thought it was interesting, but I know a lot of people don't.
I think it gets a lot of flack because the debate is always, is the Blair Witch real? This set the answer. the 2016
the 2016
Yes.
one did, yes, because it showed
correct.
like showed it to where the other ones just
Right. It's always there's always a question. That it's a big debate with the original. Is did Karen Paul, whatever, if this is all set up to kill Heather, all that stuff, right? Was that all the question?
Right.
This goes, yes, there's a Blair Witch, and it's real,
right?
Like,
yeah.
It kind of, I think that's why a lot of people have problems with it. It kind of undermines the mystery of the Blair Witch.
But I see. Here's, like I said, like I was, kind of talking about earlier, is what you said. Like the good sequel is one where it has little nuggets, right? Little tidbits. It'll answer questions, but it won't answer all your questions. It'll leave enough mystery to keep going. And this one is like, okay, the big question is the Blair Witch real? It does answer that, but it doesn't answer all the other questions. Why the hell is there like time slips going on? Why the hell, like what is causing people to like warp in and out of existence, and all this like weird stuff that happens? None of that is explained. I mean, yeah, okay, we know that the Blair Witch is real now, but do we know that the Blair Witch isn't also caught in that time warp thing? We don't know. I mean, again, there's a lot of unanswered questions. So some are answered.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see this continue from this. I don't know if it's going to. I'd love it to, though.
Yeah, but again, that's what makes a good sequel. Is it answers some questions so that people are like, oh, okay,
right.
That's good, but it leaves enough open to where people want to keep seeing it, keep going. Right. Okay, moving on. Now we'll do the just kind of touch a little bit on the Japanese remakes with either original Japanese horror movies that were kind of remade for American audiences.
J-horror Americanized, yes.
Yes. So we're talking like The Ring, The Grudge,
Shudder,
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
One missed call. Yeah.
Right. Honestly, I mean, most of these, I would kind of all put in the same category. I mean, there's slight variations, but all the same category. I would say they're superior in their original Japanese form.
Yes.
But they also rely on a lot of Japanese culture
and superstitions and what they actually believe.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So if you go as far as, like you actually, kind of like look into a little bit of Japanese culture to see why these things are scary or why these things are happening in their world, I think they're fantastic and they're great. Now, when they're remade for American audiences, they dumb a lot of that stuff down, and some of the stuff they just take out completely because, again, it doesn't make sense for an American audience. And I think it just takes a little something away. It takes enough away to where it becomes another generic, kind of a horror movie, but like the lighter
and
horror
they're PG-13
like in the 90s, right? Yeah, like that PG-13, those kind of like lighter horror movies in that late 90s, early 2000s time period. I really think when you take away those interesting elements, I really think it just ends up as another generic version of those, which I think is why they kind of stopped.
But these franchises are still going on in Japan. We stopped here.
Oh, in Japan,
we just had Ring versus The Grudge, like 2017. Right. I mean, it's still it's a big franchise over there. I understand that they did that, but I think we're now realizing that we can watch foreign horror movies in their original format and not have to Americanize it.
Right. But again, I think in order to truly appreciate it, you have to take that extra step to just, familiarize yourself with that little bit of culture that explains a lot. Because if you just watch it without understanding that, you're like, what?
Like, this isn't scary to me, right? I don't care.
Right. Yeah, like I don't understand. I don't get why is this? Why are these people like all freaked out? Like, I mean, because a lot of things you don't get. You have to look a little bit into their culture. Again, it's not a lot. You have to look a little bit into their culture to quite get them. And if you do that, they're fantastic. Right. But if you don't, might be a little confused. But yeah, the American ones are just not as good.
Yeah, agreed.
And then we'll kind of move on to the reboots here. Touch on a couple here. The first one of which will be Halloween. Now, Halloween, I know, has several timelines. I believe we're on four or five.
We'll discuss the timelines. Will be the different episodes that we're going to discuss in this franchise.
Right. Yeah. We're gonna expand on these a lot in the future. But yeah, essentially we're on 4 different timelines. So essentially it's been rebooted 3 times. Yeah, and it's still going. So yeah, it's kind of confusing into where you don't know what movies are in what storylines, which I guess is interesting. I mean, for most of them, only the first movie counts. Sometimes the second movie.
The first movie, always counts. And,
right.
And then
right. Well, except in one.
Right. Yeah.
That's the Rob Zombie one. The Rob Zombie one, the first movie doesn't count.
I mean, this is a big topic. Is it's become such a big franchise that you're now picking and choosing what you want to be canon. Right. And that's kind of the last talking about. We'll go into a little bit, so we'll get much deeper into this franchise. I mean, I've enjoyed every reboot for the most part. I love Halloween. Halloween is probably number one. Nightmare on Elm Street number two for me for franchises.
Yeah, and again, yeah.
Besides Evil Dead,
like I said, I haven't watched a lot of the newer stuff, so I'll, when we get there, I'll be watching a lot of these things for the first time, and yeah, I'll be better able to discuss it at that point. But yeah, well, again, we're discussing it later in the future. But yeah, for now, Halloween has been rebooted multiple times, and it gets confusing, but we'll work our way through it. And the other one we're going to touch on here would be a Prometheus, which is. I mean, I get it, right? Prometheus is, made by Ridley Scott, who is the guy who made the first Alien. Now, I understand why he feels that he kind of owns that world, right? Because he originated. I understand. I get it. Okay, I get it. Again, I like the movie. Don't get me wrong. Overall, I like the movie. I think it's a good movie. I just don't like that he kind of retcons and kind of overwrites a lot of the stuff that's already happened in that world. And all of those things moved forward, right? So he could have just as easily, just kept things, let those things be and then go in the past and do his own thing there. I mean, there's basically untouched as long as you end up in the same place, which I think he took a lot of weird turns. I don't quite understand what was going on there. But overall, it's good. There's just, this movie makes it slightly confusing as to where the canon of the franchise goes. And I don't think I'm the only one that does it. I know Neil Blomkamp, the guy who did District 9, has been trying to make his Alien
5. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, is essentially what his Aliens would again probably do similar to what Halloween does is he's trying to start after Aliens. He's trying to essentially stick his movie in between 2 and 3. But the way that he wrote it, I mean, I don't know the whole thing because I wasn't involved in the process. But I've seen a lot of interviews with him because I was very, very interested. And he said that his would fit in between 2 and 3, but not cut out the canon of 3 and beyond.
I mean, I wouldn't.
So
mind.
his, yeah. I mean, I'm just saying he didn't want to, again, he didn't want to do what Ridley Scott did and retcon and say all that stuff isn't my world. I built it. This is mine.
Right.
And again, I get it. I'm not saying that he doesn't have the right to do that.
I'm wondering I'm interested in the Alien TV show. I know you're following that.
Yeah,
to see where this goes. I don't need 2 or 3 more Prometheus sequels, quite honestly.
I mean, again, Covenant was good. I liked it. I know a lot of people didn't like it, but I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of your franchises, right?
Yeah. Again, I just thought it took steps that it didn't need to take, but overall, it was good. It was a good movie. But I don't want to take up too much. Yeah,
we'll be discussing that franchise.
We'll talk about it in the future.
Yep.
Okay. Now we're going to go in a little bit of legacies and revivals. I'll let you speak to most of these. The first one here would be Leprechaun.
So, I mean, we discussed Leprechaun. We'll discuss it as a franchise at some point. But the newest one, Warwick Davis didn't return as Leprechaun because he has kids and he's not making horror movies while he has small kids, which I find it hard to believe he still has small kids right now. He's 50.
Yeah, I'm surprised he just started with
Right.
Nah.
So it's I call it legacy or revival because it's been a while since we had Leprechaun movie. The one before that was not even in the same character. So it was a reboot / remake of the first Leprechaun, which didn't do well enough to do anything more. It was made by WWE Productions, and I can say that's about it. You need to know about it. But he's supposed to be playing this. It's supposed to be the same Leprechaun, even though he dies a lot, right? And it has as a legacy by it has someone playing supposed to be Jennifer Aniston's daughter from the first one. Now Jennifer Aniston didn't return, but they got a voice actor to replicate her voice to have a message on a cell phone for her daughter going back to that farm. And the dimwit, the big guy from Leprechaun, he was in it. And he gets, spoiler, killed.
Oh,
I
no.
know. And it was like I understand what they're doing with it, but it wasn't good enough to do it. And I really want Warwick Davis to come back if he's willing to do it. And it's just, we're seeing more of this legacies and, and just shoehorning in a voice impersonator for Jennifer Aniston to say that her mom died, that Jennifer Aniston's character is dead. Why? Why was that even in there? I don't think it was necessary.
Yeah, I mean, again, I just don't like when movies do that. Like, if the actor is not going to come back, I mean, if you want to kill him off screen, hey, that's great. But you don't even have to mention him at all.
Just make new entry.
There's plenty there's plenty of story that you can talk about that doesn't involve these old characters. I don't know why you got to drag them in for something that little, something that stupid.
Right.
There's just so many movies that I don't understand why they did it. Carrie Fisher in the newest Star Wars movie. I mean, that's just a travesty.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, it's just terrible. It's like they took these little clips of things that she said, and she can't say anything specific, right? Because she's not there. So they're like essentially like treating her like Lassie, as like she says like one little tiny sentence, and then Ray is like, "Oh yeah, that's exactly why." Like she's going on like this weird exposition. Right. And then they cut back to Carrie Fisher, and she goes, "Yes,
it's okay if I go on this." Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, why? What is the point of that? I mean, you could completely cut that out of the story. I understand you want to keep her in the legacy, and she deserves to be in the legacy, but like, I think it's against the legacy to put her in something like, but I think the same thing is for, even if, the actor is still alive, but they don't want anything to do with it, just leave him out of it. Just leave him out of it. There's no point. Don't try to drag somebody into something they don't want. You're just building bad blood, and then they're sure as hell not going to come back later.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we'll just wait 10 years until Warwick Davis's kids are older.
Right. And then Slumber Party Massacre, which is a franchise we need to discuss with Driller Killer. What really bothers me with this movie is there's, three Slumber Party Massacres that exist, right? Late 80s, early 90s. We have 3 of them, right? This movie builds a legacy around a character that wasn't in the original, any of them. And they had a flashback to something 30 years previously that her mom survived the Driller Killer. And it's 30 years later and it's her daughter. Like, they created this legacy within the same movie. Which is weird. I mean, like, you have...
Why the stretch? Why do you need to do that?
I mean, you had the sister survive number 1. She's in number 2 and brings them back, right? You can say anyone is this, right? But you created this whole legacy, and they created a legacy in the franchise where there's previous movies.
Well, okay. Well, here's an easy out, right? The second one is ridiculous. Okay. The second one is, the character survives. She dreams about him, and now he's real again, but he's not even the same guy. It's a different guy that sings this thing, So, like, they could have easily, like, in this remake, like, she dreamed about a driller killer, and then the driller killer comes back. It's already canon in that universe that can bring them back. Why would you need to invent this weird legacy fictional character that didn't even exist to try to hold on to some weird blood legacy thing for a modern take. There's no.
They have a legacy on the antagonist and protagonist side, which is in the same movie. Which why?
Yeah, that's bizarre.
I watched it just because I had to watch it at that point, right? I'm like, I have to see how bad this is. It was on Sci-Fi.
After the second one, I don't need to see anymore. The second one was so bad, man. I mean, it was the goofy songs, again, how he just appeared out of nowhere. Like they were in a construction site for like 90% of the movie somehow. Like they're not even at a slumber party. Like I don't get it. Anyway, just bad.
But so those are two really bad examples, right? However, we have the reboot, remake, legacy, revival of Halloween, the 2018, which really after. We're looking at almost 10 years, 8 years of no Michael Myers, really brought it back. And, the David Green really showed what someone who really cares about a franchise can do. Regardless of the timeline, like, I think they're doing great things with it. I'm excited for Halloween Ends. I'm excited for see how else they go with it. And to me, it was what it should have been. Like Rob Zombie's Halloween should have been. If this is the return to form that I think we need of slashers. It's people that generally, I'm not saying Rob Zombie didn't care. I'm saying that can expand with it and I don't know, work with, because David Green was working with John Carpenter and consulting, right? And John Carpenter even came back to the music. It's his creation 40 years later. And why not get the input of people that made the originals?
Yeah, I mean, if they're available, why not?
I think it's done well, realistically. And it kind of goes into the next legacy revival I'm looking forward to is, they're going to tackle The Exorcist next and do a trilogy from that. Now, from casting rumors, like I said, there's just a rumor, it's going to be the mom from The Exorcist, not Reagan, which is weird because she's still alive.
Right. And it's also kind of weird because she was so involved in all the sequels and stuff. So it's odd that they would bring the mom and not her.
But I mean, and these people are in talks of bringing Robert Englund back. I'm like, this is the slasher revival that was attempted starting like 20 years ago and 20 years to 10 years ago or 12 years ago that didn't work. This could be the revival of slashers now. And we're seeing that with the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre that we just got this year, right? It's legacies are a thing and it's finally reached horror. I'm excited for some of them. Like I said, Leprechaun Slumber Party Massacre, not good ones. But I think in the right hands of the right people, it's there. It's our generation making movies from stuff we watched and that we grew up on.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of these, but I will.
Yep. And, the last question, and all this stuff, we can just brief, probably a couple minutes topic is, how important is lore and continuity to these franchises now? Do you think it's more important now with the revivals and reboots we're getting? Did you care about the lore and continuity through the franchises as you watch them as a whole?
I mean, I do. And that's just because I like to watch sequels that actually sequels, right? That build on it. I have no problem with anthology series. Like if that's what you're doing, I get that. That's fine. But yeah, if you make a sequel that really has nothing to do with the other ones, I mean, I think I miss a little bit something out of it, but again, you go by the numbers, you go by, ratings, you go by money. A lot of people, especially in the horror, especially in the slasher genre, it doesn't really matter. Nobody really cares, as we've seen. We discussed earlier with, the Friday the 13th and Halloween. There was a lot of, just plain slasher movies in there where there was no character development at all. No movement, no lore changes, no nothing like that. It was just, a basic, just formulaic movie kind of going forward. And it didn't do any worse than it did before that. I just think I always go into things, whenever I start a series or a franchise, I like to start at the beginning and then I like to go forward from there, right? And if I start at the beginning and then I go, 2, 3, 4, and I see that these really have nothing to do with each other, and it doesn't really matter if I watch the other ones. I mean, I think it takes a little bit of something away from it. But that's just me.
I love continuity. I love lore. As you know, I'd rather have the next one in line than a remake. I'd like to see the next thing reasonably just to continue. And I think the one franchise that has done it the best, we'll have to see because we're going to have to cover this in probably February. Scream. I mean, Scream. Even with the retcons, if you want to go into Scream 3, which we will when we get to the franchise, the retconning, it's just adding more background, maybe not necessarily necessary, but as far as continuity and lore, I think it's held the strongest of the horror movie franchise.
Yeah, and again, I think they did that on purpose. I mean, I think their whole thing was they wanted to keep, continuity. They wanted to see, like, if you've seen the other movies before, a lot of clues and a lot of things moving forward,
right.
Yeah, so I mean, they're always like, follow the rules of the sequel and stuff like that. They were always like, it's kind of self-aware,
right?
But they took it seriously. You knew that it was different, moving on in the series. They referenced other movies. There's characters that existed only because the other movies in the series. And they took that very seriously. Like a lot of these, slashers and stuff, it didn't matter if you saw the ones before then. I mean, the only thing that was the same is they had the same, killer character. That's it. That it doesn't matter if you saw.
Well, even
not. It's the same.
Even if you didn't, you have the previously on first 5-10 minutes of the next movie, right?
Yeah, usually
you always have some lead up, and so they made it so the way that you didn't have to watch it, and you still. But I think Scream this year did a fantastic job poking fun and parodying and being meta with legacies. That was the whole thing. It was legacies in this last one. And, this maybe is going to be a new trilogy that 4 was supposed to do. Didn't. I thought it was a great movie. But 5 was all about legacies and subverting expectations. I think lore and continuity is important. And it's just, you have to, at some point, you have to pick, we'll discuss in Halloween, your favorite timeline. Right? The darkest timeline, if you will. The world the D&D does.
Right.
So, no, I think it's very important. I'm excited to see how things continue, and we'll get more legacies with Halloween, with Exorcist, maybe with the Alien series, with the Friday the 13th series, with the Predator series, with all the stuff they want to do, is just keep it going. Don't retread. You can retread, but you don't have to nullify anything in the past, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's ideal. I mean, if the franchise has been written into the ground or if it's been destroyed, I see it's okay to have a reboot or something. But yeah, especially the ways we see a lot of these franchises are still going, or they've had an entry in the last decade that did well enough. There's no point. But again, yeah, ideally that wouldn't happen. But again, it's Hollywood loves to remake stuff. So. It'll happen. We'll just hope they're better in the future.
Yep. All right.
So I think we'll wrap that up.
Yes.
Okay. And then stay tuned for next week. We'll be discussing the Jeepers Creepers movie franchise, which has now expanded to 4 movies. So yes, we'll be discussing those and their directors' questionable practices, and all that. So until next time, I am Salem saying long live the new flesh.
Graveyard saying have you checked on the children?